Section 22 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 22, Blaise. Ambrose of Menthon and his meek and humble follower rested at Chalons on their way to Paris. For many weeks they had begged from door to door, sleeping in some hermit's cell or by the roadside when the severity of the bitter nights permitted, occasionally finding shelter in a wayside convent. So patient, so courageous before hardship, so truly sad and remorseful, so grateful for the distant chance of ultimate pardon was Dirk, that the saint grew to love the penitent vagabond. No one eager to look for it could have found any fault with his behaviour. He was gentle as a girl, obedient as a servant, rigid in his prayers, and he had a strangely complete knowledge of the offices and penances of the Church. Silent and sorrowful often, taking no pleasure in anything save the saint's talk of paradise and holy things. Particularly, he loved to hear of the dead youth Blaise, of his saintly life, of his desire to join the stern brotherhood of the Sacred Heart in Paris, of his fame as one beloved of God, of the convent's wish to receive him, of his great learning, of his beautiful death in the snowy evening. To all this Dirk listened with still attention, and from St. Ambrose's rapt and loving recital he gathered little earthly details of the subject of their speech, such as that he was from Flanders, of a noble family, that his immediate relatives were dead, that his years were no more than 20, and that he was dark and pale. For himself, Dirk had little to say. He described simply his shame and remorse after he had stolen the holy gold, his gradual sickening of his companions, the long torture of his awakening soul, his attempts to find the saint, and how, finally, after he had resolved to flee his evil life and enter a convent, he had run out of Frankfurt, found a boat waiting, and so drifted to St. Ambrose's feet. The saint, rejoicing in his penitence, suggested that he should enter the convent, whither they journeyed, with the tidings of the holy youth's death, and Dirk consented with humble gratitude. And so they passed through Chalons and rested in a deserted hut overlooking the waters of the Marne. Having finished their scanty meal, they were seated together under the rough shelter. The luxury of a fire was denied their austerity. A cold wind blew in and out of the ill-built doors, and a colourless light filled the mean, bare place. Dirk sat on a wooden stool, reading aloud the writings of St. Jerome. He wore a coarse brown robe, very different from his usual attire, fastened round the waist with a rope into which was twisted a wooden rosary. His feet were encased in rude leather boots, his hands reddened with the cold, his face hollow and of a bluish pallor in which his eyes shone feverishly large and dark. His smooth hair hung on to his shoulders. He stooped, in contrast with his usual erect carriage. Pausing on his low and gentle reading, he looked across at the saint. Ambrose of Menthon sat on a rough-hewn bench against the rougher wall. Weariness, exposure, and sheer weakness of body had done their work at last. Dirk knew that for 3 nights he had not slept. He was asleep now, or had swooned. His fair head fell forward on his breast, his hands hung by his side. As Dirk became assured that his companion was unconscious, he slowly rose and set down the holy volume. He was himself half-starved, cold to the heart and shuddering. He looked round the plaster walls, and the meek expression of his face changed to one of scorn, derision, and wicked disdain. He darted a bitter glance at the wan man and crept towards the door. Opening it softly, he gazed out. The scene was fair and lonely. The distant tourelle of Chalons rose clear and pointed against the winter clouds. Near by, the grey river flowed between its high banks, where the bare willows grew and the snow wreaths lay. Dirk took shivering steps into the open and turned towards the Marne. The keen wind penetrated his poor garments and lifted the heavy hair from his thin cheeks. He beat his breast, chafed his hands, and walked rapidly. Reaching the bank, he looked up and down the river. There was no one in sight, neither boat nor animal nor house to break the monotony of land, sky, and water. Only those distant towers of the town. Dirk walked among the twisted willows, then came to a pause. A little ahead of him were a black man and a black dog, both seated on the bank and gazing towards Chalons. The youth came a little nearer. "Good even," he said. "It is very cold." The blackamoor looked round. "Are you pleased with the way you travel?" he asked, nodding his head. "And your companion?" Dirk's face lowered. "How much longer am I to endure it?" "You must have patience," said the black man, "and endurance." "I have both," answered Dirk. "Look at my hands. They are no longer soft, but red and hard. My feet are galled and wounded in rough boots. I must walk till I am sick, then pray instead of sleeping. I see no fire, and scarcely do I touch food." "You will be rewarded, and revenged too. Oh, ho, oh! It is very cold, as you say, very cold." "What must I do?" asked Dirk. The black man rubbed his hands together. "You know, you know." Dirk's pinched, wan face grew intent and eager. "Am I to use this?" He touched the breast of his rough habit. "Yea." "Then shall I be left defenceless?" Dirk's voice shook a little. "If anything should happen, I would not, I could not. O Satanas, I could not be revealed." The blackamoor rose from among the willows. "Do you trust yourself and me?" he asked. Dirk put his thin hand over his eyes. "Yea, master." "Then you know what to do. You will not see me for many years. When you have triumphed, I shall come." He turned swiftly and ran down the bank, the hound at his heels. One after another they leapt into the waters of the Marne and disappeared with an inner sound. Dirk straightened himself and set his lips. He re-entered the hut to find Ambrose of Menthon still against the wall, now indeed wearily asleep. Dirk came softly forward. Slowly and cautiously he put his hand into his bosom and drew out a small green-coloured vial. With his eyes keenly on the saint he broke the seal, then crept close. By St. Ambrose's side hung his rosary, every bead smooth with the constant pressure of his lips. Dirk raised the heavy crucifix attached and poured onto it the precious drop contained in the vial. St. Ambrose did not wake nor move. Dirk drew away and crouched against the wall, cursing the bitter wind with fierce eyes. When the saint awoke, Dirk was on the broken stool reading aloud the writings of St. Jerome. "Is it still light?" asked Ambrose of Menthon amazedly. "It is the dawn," answered Dirk. "And I have slept the night through." The saint dragged his stiff limbs from the seat and fell on his knees in a misery of prayer. Dirk closed the book and watched him, watched his long fingers twining in the beads of his rosary, watched him kiss the crucifix again and again. Then he too knelt, his face hidden in his hands. He was the first to rise. "Master, shall we press on to Paris?" he asked humbly. The saint lifted dazed eyes from his devotions. "Yea," he said, "yea." Dirk began putting together in a bundle their few books and the wooden platter in which they collected their broken food, this being their all. "I dreamt last night of paradise," said St. Ambrose faintly. "The floor was so thick strewn with close little flowers, red, white, and purple, and it was warm as Italy in May." Dirk swung the bundle onto his shoulder and opened the door of the hut. They passed out into the dreary landscape and took their slow way along the banks of the Marne. Until midday they did not pause, scarcely spoke. Then they passed through a little village, and the charitable gave them food. That night they slept in the open, under shelter of a hedge, and Ambrose of Menthon complained of weakness. Dirk, waking in the dark, heard him praying, heard too the rattle of the wooden rosary. When the light came and they once more recommenced their journey, the saint was so feeble he was fain to lean on Dirk's shoulder. "I think I am dying," he said. His face was flushed, his eyes burning. He smiled continuously. "Let me reach Paris," he added, "that I may tell the brethren of Blaise." The youth supporting him wept bitterly. Towards noon they met a woodsman's cart that helped them on their way. That night they spent in the stable of an inn. The next day they descended into the valley of the Seine, and by the evening reached the gates of Paris. As the bells all over the beautiful city were ringing to vespers, they arrived at their destination, an old and magnificent convent, surrounded with great gardens set near the river bank. The monks were singing the Magnificat, their thin voices came clearly on the frosty air. Fecit potentiam in brachio suo, dispersit subos mente cordi su. Ambrose of Menthon took his feeble hand from Dirk's arm and sank on his knees. Deposuit potentes de sede, et exaltavit humilies. But Dirk's pale lips curled, and he gazed at the sun flaming beyond the convent walls. There was a haughty challenge in his brooding eyes. Esurientes implevit bones, et divites timisit inenes, suscepit Israel puerum sum, recordatus misericordiae suae. The saint murmured the chanted words and clasped his hands on his breast, while the sun brightened vividly above the wild waters of the Seine. Sicut locutus ead patre nostros, Abraham et semini eius en secula. The chant faded away on the still evening, but the saint remained kneeling. "Master," whispered Dirk, "shall we not go in to them?" Ambrose of Menthon raised his fair face. "I am dying," he smiled. "A keen flame licks up my blood and burns my heart to ashes. Sustinuit anime me in verbo uius." His voice failed, he sank forward and his head fell against the grey beds of rue and fennel. "Alas! Alas!" cried Dirk. He made no attempt to bring assistance nor called aloud, but stood still gazing with intent eyes at the unconscious man. But when the monks came out of the chapel and turned 2 by 2 towards the convent, Dirk pulled off his worn cap. "Divinum auxilium mancat semper nobiscum." "Amen," said Dirk. Then he ran lightly forward and flung himself before the procession. "My father!" he cried with a sob in his voice. The priests stopped, the amens still trembling on their lips. "Ambrose of Menthon lies within your gates, a dying man," said Dirk meekly and sadly. With little exclamations of awe and grief the grey-clad figures followed him to where the saint lay. "He has done with his body," said an old monk, holding up the dying man. The flushed sky faded behind them. The saint stirred and half opened his eyes. "Blaise," he whispered, "Blaise." He tried to point to Dirk, who knelt at his feet. "He will tell you." His eyes closed again. He strove to pray. The De Profundis trembled on his lips. He made a sudden upward gesture with his hands, smiled and died. For a while there was silence among them. broken only by a short sob from Dirk. Then the monks turned to the ragged, emaciated youth who crouched at the dead feet. Dirk roused himself as if from a silent prayer, made the sign of the cross, and rose. "Who art thou?" they asked reverently. "The youth, Blaise, my fathers," he answered humbly. End of section 22. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 23 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, The Pope, Chapter 1, Cardinal Luigi Caprarola. The evening service in the Basilica of St. Peter was over. Pilgrims, peasants, and monks had departed. The last chant of the officiating cardinal's train still trembled on the incense-filled air when a man, richly and fantastically dressed, entered the bronze door and advanced a little way down the centre aisle. He bent his head to the altar, then paused and looked about him with the air of a stranger. He was well used to magnificence, but this first sight of the chapel of the Vatican caused him to catch his breath. To one side of the high altar stood a purple chair and a purple footstool, the seat of the cardinal, sometimes of the pontiff. This splendid and holy beauty abashed, yet inspired the stranger. He leant against one of the smooth columns and gazed at the altar. The novices were putting out the candles and preparing to close the church. Their swift feet made no sound. Silently the little stars about the high altar disappeared, and deeper shadows fell over the aisles. The stranger watched the white figures moving to and fro until no light remained, save the purple and scarlet lamps that cast rich rays over the gold and stained the pure lilies into colour. Then he left his place and went slowly towards the door. Already the bronze gates had been closed. Only the entrance to the Vatican and one leading into a side street remained open. Several monks issued from the chapels and left by this last. The stranger still lingered. Down from the altar came the two novices, prostrated themselves, then proceeded along the body of the church. They extinguished the candles in the candelabra set down the aisles, and a bejewelled darkness fell on the basilica. The stranger stood under a malachite and platinum shrine that blinded with the glimmer and sparkle of golden mosaic. Before it burnt graduated tapers. One of the novices came towards it, and the man waiting there moved towards him. "Sir," he said in a low voice, "may I speak to you?" He spoke in Latin, with the accent of a scholar, and his tone was deep and pleasant. The novice paused and looked at him, gazed intently, and beheld a very splendid person. A man in the prime of life, tall above the ordinary, and above the ordinary, gorgeous to the eyes. His face was sunburnt to a hue nearly as dark as his light bronze hair, and his western eyes showed clearly bright and pale in contrast. In his ears hung long pearl and gold ornaments that touched his shoulders. His dress was half Eastern, of fine violet silk and embroidered leather. He carried in his belt a curved scimitar inset with turquoise. By his side a short gold sword, and against his hip he held a purple cap ornamented with a plume of peacock's feathers, and wore long gloves fretted in the palm with the use of rein and sword. But more than these details did the stranger's face strike the novice, a face almost as perfect as the marks of the gods found in the temples. The rounded and curved features were over full for a man, and the expression was too indifferent, troubled, almost weak, to be attractive, but taken in itself the face was notably beautiful. Noting the novice's intent gaze, a flush crept into the man's dark cheek. "I am a stranger," he said. "I want to ask you of Cardinal Caprarola. He officiated here today?" "Yea," answered the novice. "What can I tell you of him? He is the greatest man in Rome. Now his holiness is dying. he added. Why, I have heard of him, even in Constantinople. I think I saw him many years ago, before I went to the East. It may be, sir, he said. His Eminence was a poor youth, as I might be. He came from Flanders. It was in Courtrai I thought I saw him. I know not if he was ever there. He became a disciple of Saint Ambrose of Menthon when very young, and after the saint's death he joined the convent of the Sacred Heart in Paris. You have heard of that, sir? I have heard nothing. I have been away many years. This man, Cardinal Caprarola, he is a saint also, is he not? Tell me more of him. Born of Dendermonde he was, sir, Louis his name. In our tongue, Luigi. Blaise, the name he took in the convent. He came to Rome 7, nay, it must be 8 years ago. His Holiness created him Bishop of Ostia, then of Caprarola, which last name he retains now he is Cardinal. He is the greatest man in Rome, repeated the novice. And a saint? Asked the other with a wistful eagerness. Certes, when he was a youth he was famous for his holy, austere life. Now he lives in magnificence as befits a prince of the church. He is very holy. There was a great service here today, the stranger asked. Yea, very many pilgrims were here. I grieve that I was too late. Think you Cardinal Caprarola would see one unknown to him? If the errand warranted it, sir. I seek peace. If it be anywhere, it is in the hands of this servant of God. My soul is sick. Will he help me heal it? Yea, I do think so. The youth turned as he spoke towards the little side door. I must close the basilica, sir, he added. The stranger seemed to rouse himself from depths of unhappy thoughts, and followed through the quivering gloom. Where should I find the Cardinal? He asked. His palace lies in the Via de San Giovanni in Laterano. Any will tell you the way, sir. The novice opened the door. God be with you. And with you. The stranger stepped into the open, and the church door was locked behind him. The purple afterglow still lingered over Rome. It was May and sweetly warm. As the stranger crossed the piazza of St. Peter, the breeze was like the touch of silk on his face. He walked slowly, and presently hesitated, looked round the ruined temples, broken palace and walls. There were people about, not many, mostly monks. He turned toward the Arch of Titus. The ladies laughed and stared as he passed. One took a flower from her hair and threw it after him, at which he frowned, blushed, and hastened on. He had never been equal to the admiration he roused in women, though he disliked neither them nor their admiration. He carried still on his wrist the mark of a knife left there by a Byzantine princess who had found his face fair and his wooing cold. Passing the fountain of Meta-Sudans and the remains of the Flavian amphitheatre, he gained the Via de San Giovanni in Laterano, leading to the Calamantana gate. Here he drew a little apart from the crowd and looked about him. In the distance the Vatican and the Castel San Angelo showed faintly against the remote Apennines. He could distinguish the banner of the Emperor hanging slackly in the warm air, the little lights in St. Peter's. A few moments brought him to the magnificent gates of the Villa Caprarola. They stood open upon a garden of flowers, just gleamingly visible in the dusk. The stranger hesitated in the entrance, fixing his gaze on the luminous white walls of the palace that showed between the boughs of citron and cypress. This cardinal, this prince, who was the greatest man in Rome, which was to say in Christendom, had strangely captured his imagination. He liked to think of him as an obscure and saintly youth devoting his life to the service of God, rising by no arts or intrigues, but by the pure will of his master, solely until he dominated the great empire of the West. The stranger, now at his beautiful gates, had been searching for peace for many years, in many lands, and always in vain. In Constantinople he had heard of the holy Frankish priest, who was already a greater power than the old and slowly dying pope, and it had comforted his tired heart to think that there was one man in a high place set there by God alone, one, too, of a pure life and noble soul. If any could give him promise of salvation, if any could help him to redeem his wasted, weak life, it would be he, this Cardinal, who could not know evil save as a name. With this object he came to Rome. He wished to lay his sins and penitence at the feet of him who had been a meek and poor novice, and now by his virtues was Luigi Caprarola, as mighty as the Emperor and as innocent as the angels. Shame and awe for a while held him irresolute. How could he dare relate his miserable and horrible story to this saint? But God had bidden him, and the holy were always merciful. He walked slowly between the dim flowers and bushes to the stately columned portico. With a thickly beating heart and a humble carriage, he mounted the low, wide steps and stood at the Cardinal's door, which should open on a marble vestibule dimly lit with a soft roseate violet colour. 2 huge negroes wearing silver collars and tiger skins were on guard at each column of the door, and as the newcomer set foot within the portals one of them struck the silver bell attached to his wrist. Instantly appeared a slim and gorgeous youth, habited in black, a purple flower fastened at his throat. The stranger took off his cap. "This is the residence of his Eminence Cardinal Caprarola?" he asked, and the hint of hesitation always in his manner was accentuated. "Yea," the youth bowed gracefully. "I am his Eminence's secretary, Messer Paolo Orsini. I do desire to see the Cardinal." "What is your purpose, sir?" "One neither political nor worldly." He paused, flushed, then added, "I would confess to his Eminence. I have come from Constantinople for that alone." "The Cardinal hears confession in the Basilica." "Certes, I know, yet I would crave to see him privately. I have matters relating to my soul to put before him. Surely he will not refuse me." The stranger's voice was unequal, his bearing troubled, as the secretary curiously observed. Penitents, anxious for their souls, did not often trouble the Cardinal, but Orsini's aristocratic manner showed no surprise. "His Eminence," he said, "is ever loath to refuse himself to the faithful. I will ask him if he will give you audience. What, sir, is your quality and your name?" "I am unknown here," answered the other humbly. "Lately I have come from Constantinople, where I held an office at the court of Bau, but by birth I am a Frank, of the Cardinal's own country." "Sir, your name?" repeated the elegant secretary. "I have been known by many, but let his Eminence have the truth. I am Thierry, born of Dendermonde." Paolo Orsini bowed again. "I will acquaint the Cardinal," he said. "Will you await me here?" He was gone, as swiftly and silently as he had come. Thierry, hand to brow, gazed about him. He had seen nothing more lavishly splendid in the East. Cardinal Caprarola was no ascetic, whatever the youth Blaise may have been. And for a moment Thierry was bewildered and disappointed. Could a saint live thus? Then he reflected. Good it was to consider that God, and not the devil, who so often used beauty and wealth for his lures, had given a man this. He walked up and down, none to watch him but the 4 silent and motionless negroes. The exquisite lights, the melody of the fountain, the sweet odours that rose from the slow curling blue vapours, the gorgeous surroundings, lulled and soothed. He felt that at last, After his changeful wanderings, his restless unhappiness, he had found his goal and his haven. In this man's hands was redemption. This man was housed as befitted an ambassador of the Lord of Heaven. Paolo Orsini, in person as rare and splendid as the palace, returned. "The Cardinal will receive you, sir," he said. If the message astonished him, he did not show it. He bowed before Theirry and preceded him up the magnificent stairs. Paolo Orsini opened a gilt door and held it wide while Theirry entered. Then he bowed himself away, saying, "His Eminence will be with you presently." Theirry found himself in a fair-sized chamber, walls, floor and ceiling composed of ebony and mother of pearl. Incense burnt in a gold brazier, the rich scent of it glowing almost insupportable in the close confined space. The dim blue light, the strong perfumes were confusing to the senses. His pulses throbbed, his heart leapt. It did not seem as if he could speak to the Cardinal. Then it seemed as if he could tell him everything and leave absolved. Yet, what was there in the place reviving memories that had been thrust deep into his heart for years? A certain room in an old house in Antwerp, with the August sunlight over the figure of a young man gilding a devil, a chamber in the college at Bâle, and 2 youths bending over a witch's fire, a dark wet night and the sound of a weak voice coming to him, Frankfort, and a garden blazing with crimson roses. Other scenes, crowded, horrible. Why did he think of them here, in this remote land among strangers, here where he had come to purge his soul? There was a shiver of silks, and the Cardinal stepped into the chamber. Theirry sank on his knees and bowed his throbbing head. The Cardinal slowly closed the door. A low rumble of thunder sounded. A great storm was gathering over the Tyrrhenian Sea. End of section 23. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 24 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 2, The Confession. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. I give you greeting, said the Cardinal, in a low, grave voice. He crossed to the ivory chair and seated himself. Theirry lifted his head and looked eagerly at the man who he hoped would be his saviour. The Cardinal was young, of the middle height, of a full but elegant person, and conveying an impression of slightness and delicacy, though he was, in reality, neither small nor fragile. His face was pale, by this light only dimly to be seen. He wore a robe of vivid pink and violet silk that spread about the step on which his chair was placed. His hands were very beautiful, and ornamented with a variety of costly rings. On his head was a black skullcap, and outside it his hair showed thick, curling, and of a chestnut-red colour. His foot, very small and well-shaped, encased in a gold slipper, showed beneath his gown. He caught hold of the ivory arms of his seat and looked straight at Theirry with intense, dark eyes. "On what matters did you wish to speak with me?" he asked. Theirry could not find words. A choking sense of horror, of something dreadful and blasphemous beyond all words, clutched at his heart. He stared at the young Cardinal. He must be going mad. "The air, the incense makes me giddy, Holy Father," he murmured. The Cardinal touched a bell and motioned to Theirry to rise. A beautiful boy in a white tunic answered the summons. "Extinguish the incense," said the Cardinal, "and open the windows, Gian. It is very hot. A storm gathers, does it not?" The youth drew apart the painted curtains and unlatched the window. As the cooler air was wafted into the close chamber, Theirry breathed more freely. "The stars are all hidden, your Eminence," said Gian, looking at the night. "Certainly it is a storm." He raised the brazier, shook out the incense, leaving it smouldering greyly, went on one knee to the Cardinal, then withdrew backwards. As the door closed behind him, Luigi Caprarola turned to the man standing humbly before him. "Now you can speak?" he said gravely. Thierry flushed. "Scarcely have I the heart. Your Eminence abashes me. I have a sickening tale to relate. Hearing of you, I thought, this holy man can give me peace. And I came half across the world to lay my troubles at your feet. But now, sir, now, I fear to speak. Indeed, am scarce able. Unreal and hideous it seems in this place." "In brief, sir," said the Cardinal, "ye have changed your mind? I think ye were ever of a changeful disposition, Thierry of Dendermonde." "How does your Eminence know that of me? It is, alas, true." "I see it in your face," answered the Cardinal. "And something else I see. You are, and long have been, unhappy." "It is my great unhappiness that has brought me before your Eminence." "Weary of sin and afraid of heaven, ye have come to seek absolution of me," said the Cardinal. "Yea, if it might be granted me, if by any penitence I might obtain pardon." Then Thierry, whose gaze was fixed on the ground as he spoke, had an extraordinary vivid impression that the Cardinal was laughing. He looked up quickly, only to behold Luigi Caprarola calm and grave. A peal of thunder sounded, and the echoes hovered in the chamber. "The confession must come before the absolution," said the Cardinal. "Tell me, my son, what troubles you?" Thierry shuddered. "It involves others than myself. The seal of the confession is sacred, and I will ask for no names. Thierry of Dendermonde, kneel here and confess." He pointed to the ivory footstool close to his raised seat. Thierry came and humbly knelt. The curtains fluttered in the hot wind, a flash of lightning darted in between them and mingled with the luminous colour cast by the faint lamps. The Cardinal took up the gold book and laid it on his knee. His pink silk sleeve almost touched Thierry's lips. His garments gave out a strange and beautiful perfume. "Tell me of these sins of thine," he said, half under his breath. "I must go far back," answered the penitent in a trembling voice, "for your Eminence to understand my sins. They had small beginnings." He paused and fixed his gaze on the Cardinal's long fair fingers resting across the gold cover of the breviary. "I was born in Dendermonde," he said at last. "My father was a clerk who taught me his learning. When he died I came to Courtrai. I was 18, ambitious, and clever beyond other scholars of my age. I wished above everything to go to one of the colleges. To gain a living I taught the arts I was acquainted with. Among others I gave lessons in music to a daughter of a great lord in Courtrai. In this manner I came to know her brother, who was a young knight of lusty desires. He was, as I, restless and impatient with Courtrai, but, unlike me, he was innocent, for I—" he moistened his lips. "I, about this time, began to practice black magic." "Black magic?" repeated the Cardinal. "Go on." "I read forbidden books that I found in an old library in the house of a Jew whose son I taught. I tried to work spells, to raise spirits. I was very desperate to better myself. I wished to become as Alcuin, as Saint Jerome, nay, as Zerdusht himself. But I was not skilful enough. I could do little or nothing. The young knight I have spoken of was in love with a mighty lady who came through Courtrai. He wished to follow her to Frankfurt. She had given him hopes that she would find him service there. He asked me to bear him company, and I was glad to go. On the journey he told me of his marriage to the daughter of a neighbouring lord, and, although it is no matter here, he knew not if she were alive or dead, but he knew of the place where she had last been known of, and we went thither. It was in the old half-deserted town of Antwerp. We found the house, and there we met a youth, who told us of the maid's death, and showed us her grave." "What of this youth?" asked the Cardinal softly. "Tell me of him." "He ruined me. By night he came to me and told me of his studies. Black magic, black magic. He cast spells and raised a devil. In a mirror he showed me visions. I swore with him faithful friendship. He ruined my soul. He sold some of the goods in the house, and we went together to Basle College. He was high-born, I think, dainty in his ways and pleasant to look upon. My faltering soul was caught by his wiles, for he spoke of great rewards. I know not who he was, man or demon. I think he loved me." There was a little silence in the chamber. Then the Cardinal spoke. "Loved you? What makes you think he loved you?" "Certes, he said so, and acted so. We went to Basle College. Then I also thought I loved him. He was the only thing in the world I had ever spoken to of my hopes, my desires. We continued our experiments. Our researches were blasphemous, horrible. He was ever more skilful than I. Then one day I met a lady, and then I knew myself hideous. But that very night I was drawn into the toils again. We cast a spell over another student. We were discovered and fled the college." A flash of lightning pierced the blue gloom like a sword rending silk. Theirry winced and shuddered as the thunder crashed overhead. "Does your tale end here?" demanded the Cardinal. "Alas, alas, no. I fell from worse sin to worse sin. We were poor, we met a monk, robbed him of God his money, and left him for dead. We came to Frankfort and lived in the house of an Egyptian hag, and I began to loathe the youth because the lady was ever in my thoughts, and he hated the lady bitterly because of this. He tempted me to do murder for gain, and I refused for her sake." Theirry's voice became hot and passionate. "Then I found that he was tempting her, my saint, but I had no fear that she would fall, and while she spurned him I thought I could also. And I did. But she proved no stronger. She loved her steward and bid him slay his wife. 'You staked on her virtue,' the devil cried to me, 'and you've lost, lost!'" The sobs thickened his voice, and the bitter tears gathered in his beautiful eyes. I was the youth's prey again, but now I hated him for his victory. We came back to Frankfort, and he was sweet and soft to me, while I was thinking how I might injure him as he had injured me. I dwelt on that picture of her, dishonoured and undone, and I hated him, so waited my chance, and the night we reached the city I betrayed him for what he was, betrayed him to whom I had sworn friendship. Well, half the town came howling through the snow to seize him, but we were too late. We found a flaming house, it burnt to ashes, he with it. I had had my revenge, but it brought me no peace. I left the West and went to the East, to India, Persia, to Greece. I avoided both God and the devil. I dreaded hell and dared not hope for heaven. I tried to forget, but could not. I tried to repent, but could not. Good and evil strove for me until the Lord had pity. I heard of you, and I have come to Rome to cast myself at your feet, to ask your aid to help throw myself on God his mercy. God wins, I think, this time," he continued in an unsteady voice. "I have confessed my sins, I will do penance for them, and die at least in peace. God and the angels win." The Cardinal rose. With one hand he held to the back of the ivory chair. With the other he clasped the golden book to his breast. The light shining on his red hair showed it in filmy brightness against the wall of ebony and mother of pearl. His face and lips were very pale above the vivid hue of his robe. His eyes, large and dark, stared at Theirry. Again the lightning flashed between the two and seemed to sink into the floor at the Cardinal's feet. He lifted his head proudly and listened to the following mighty roll. When the echoes had quivered again into hot stillness, he spoke. "The devil and his legions win, I think," he said. "At least they have served Dirk Renswoude well." Theirry fell back and back until he crouched against the gleaming wall. "Cardinal Caprarola!" he cried fearfully. "Cardinal Caprarola, speak to me. Even here I hear the fiend's gibe." The Cardinal stepped from the ebony dais, his stiff robes making a rustling as he walked. He laughed. "Have I learned a mien so holy my old comrade knows me not? Have I changed so? I, who was dainty and pleasant to look upon, your friend and your bane?" He paused in the centre of the room. The open window, the dark behind it, the waving curtains, the fierce lightning made a terrific background for his haughty figure. But Theirry moaned and whispered in his throat. "Look at me," commanded the Cardinal. "Look at me well, you who betrayed me. Am I not he who gilded a devil one August afternoon in a certain town in Flanders?" Theirry drew himself up and pressed his clenched hands to his temples. "Betrayed!" he shrieked. "It is I who am betrayed. I sought God and have been delivered unto the devil." The thunder crashed so that his words were lost in the great noise of it. The blue and forked lightning darted between them. "You know me now?" asked the Cardinal. Theirry slipped to his knees, crying like a child. "Where is God? Where is God?" The Cardinal smiled. "He is not here," he answered, "nor in any place where I have been." An awful stillness fell after the crash of thunder. Theirry hid his face, cowering like a man who feels his back bared to the lash. "Cannot you look at me?" asked the Cardinal in a half mournful scorn. "After all these years am I to meet you thus at my feet?" Theirry sprang up, his features mask-like in their unnatural distortion and lifeless hue. "You do well to taunt me," he answered, "for I am an accursed fool. I have been seeking for what does not exist — God. Ay, now I know that there is no God and no heaven, therefore what matter for my soul, what matter for any of it, since the devil owns us all?" "Your soul!" cried the Cardinal, as before. "Always have you thought too much and not enough of that. You served too many masters, and not one faithfully. Had you been a stronger man, you had stayed with your fallen saint, not spurned her and then avenged her by my betrayal." He crossed to the window and closed it, the while the lightning picked him out in a fierce flash, and waited until the after crash had rocked to silence, his eyes all the while not leaving the shrinking, horror-stricken figure of Theirry. "Well, it is a long while ago," he said, "and I and you have changed." "How did you escape that night?" asked Theirry hoarsely. "The master I serve is powerful," smiled the Cardinal. "He saved me then and set me where I am now, the greatest man in Rome, so great a man that did you wish a second time to betray me, you might shout the truth in the streets and find no one to believe you." "Betray you!" cried Theirry, wild-eyed. "No, I bow the knee to the greatest thing I have met, and kiss your hand, your Eminence." The Cardinal turned and looked at him over his shoulder. "I never broke my vows," he said softly, "the vows of comradeship I made to you. Just now you said you thought I loved you. Then, I mean, in the old days." He paused, and his delicate hand crept over his heart. "Well, I loved you, and it ruined me as the devils promised. Last night I was warned that you would come today, and that you would be my bane. Well, I do not care, since you are come, for, sir, I love you still." "Dirk!" cried Theirry. "Do you suppose it matters to me that you are weak, foolish, or that you betrayed me? You are the one thing in all the world I care for. Love! What was your love when you left her at Sebastian's feet? Had she been my lady, I had stayed and laughed at all of it. It is not the devil who has taught you to be so faithful," said Theirry. For the first time a look of trouble, almost of despair, came into the Cardinal's eyes. He turned his head away. "You shame me," continued Theirry. "I have no constancy in me. Thinking of my own soul, almost have I forgotten Jacobea of Martzburg. And yet you loved her." "Maybe I did. It is long ago." A bitter smile curved the Cardinal's lips. "Is that the way men care for women?" he said. "Certes, not in that manner had I wooed and remembered, had I been a lover." "Strange that we, meeting here like this, should talk of love," cried Theirry, his heart heaving, his eyes dilating. "Strange that I, driven round the world by fear of God, that I, coming here to one of God's own saints, should find myself in the devil's net again. Come, he has done much for you, what will he do for me?" The Cardinal smiled sadly. "Neither God nor devil will do anything for you are not single-hearted, neither constant to good nor evil, but I will risk everything to serve your desires." Theirry laughed. "Heaven has cast the world away and we are mad. You, famous as a holy man, did you murder the young Blaise? I will back to India, to the East, and die an idol worshipper. See yonder crucifix, it hangs upon your walls, but the Christ does not rise to smite you. You handle the holy mysteries in the church, and no angel slays you on the altar steps. Let me away from Rome." He turned to the gilt door, but the Cardinal caught his sleeve. "Stay," he said, "stay, and all I promise you in the old days shall come true. Do you doubt me? Look about you, see what I have won for myself. Nay, let me go." The last rumble of the thunder crossed their speech. "Stay, and I will make you Emperor." "Oh, devil!" cried Theirry. "Can you do that?" "We will rule the world between us. Yea, I will make you Emperor, if you will stay in Rome and serve me. I will snatch the diadem from Balthasar's head and cast his Empress out as I ever meant to do, and you shall bear the sceptre of the Caesars. Oh, my friend, my friend!" He held out his right hand as he spoke. Theirry caught it, crushed the fingers in his hot grasp, and kissed the brilliant rings. The Cardinal flushed and dropped his lids over sparkling eyes. "You will stay?" he breathed. "Yea, my sweet fiend, I am yours, and wholly yours. Lo, were not rewards such as these better worth crossing the world for than a pardon from God?" He laughed and staggered back against the wall, his look dazed and reckless. The Cardinal withdrew his hand and crossed to the ivory seat. "Now, farewell," he said. "The audience has been overlong. I know where to find you, and in a while I shall send for you. Farewell, O Theirry of Dendermonde. Farewell, O disciple of Satanas. I, your humble follower, shall look for fulfilment of your promises." When Luigi Caprarola was alone, he put his hand over his eyes and swayed backwards as if about to fall, while his breath came in tearing pants. With an effort he steadied himself, and clenching his hands now over his heart, paced up and down the room, his Cardinal's robes trailing after him, his golden rosary glittering against his knee. As he struggled for control, the gilt door was opened, and Paolo Orsini bowed himself into his presence. "A messenger has just come from the Vatican, my lord." "Ah, His Holiness was found dead in his sleep an hour ago, your Eminence." The Cardinal paled and fixed his burning eyes on the secretary. "Thank you, Orsini. I thought he would not last the spring. Well, we must watch the conclave." He moved his handkerchief from his mouth and twisted it in his fingers. The secretary was taking his dismissal when the Cardinal recalled him. "Orsini, it is desirable we should have an audience with the Empress. She has many creatures in the church who must be brought to heel. Write to her, Orsini." "I will, my lord." The young man withdrew, and Luigi Caprarola stood very still, staring at the gleaming walls of his gorgeous cabinet. End of section 24. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 25 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 3, The Empress. Isabeau, wife of Balthasar of Courtrai and Empress of the West, waited in the porphyry cabinet of Cardinal Caprarola. She sat on a low chair by the window and rested her chin on her hand. Her superb eyes were grave and thoughtful. She did not move from her reflective attitude during the time the haughty priest kept her waiting. When at last he entered with a shimmer and ripple of purple silks, she rose and bent her head. "It pleases you to make me attendant on your pleasure, my lord?" she said. Cardinal Caprarola gave her calm greeting. "My time is not my own," he added. "God, his service comes first, lady." The Empress returned to her seat. "Have I come here to discuss God with your Eminence?" she asked, and her fair mouth was scornful. The Cardinal crossed to the far end of the cabinet and slowly took his place on his carved gold chair. "It is of ourselves we will speak," he said, smiling. "Certes, your Grace will have expected that." "Nay," she answered. "What is there we have in common, Cardinal Caprarola?" "Ambition," said his Eminence, "which is known alike to saint and sinner." Isabeau looked at him swiftly. He was smiling with lips and eyes, sitting back with an air of ease and power that discomposed her. She had never liked him. "If your talk be of policy, my lord, it is to the Emperor you should go. I think you have as much influence in Rome as your husband, my daughter." "It is our influence you wish, my lord? Certes, a matter for the Emperor." "Yea, you understand me. Your Eminence desires our support in the conclave now sitting," she continued haughtily. "But have you ever shown so much duty to us that we should wish to see you in St. Peter's seat?" She thought herself justified in speaking thus to a man whose greatness had always galled her, for she saw in this appeal for her help an amazing confession of weakness on his part. But Luigi Caprarola remained entirely composed. "You have your creatures in the church," he said, "and you intend one of them to wear the tiara. There are 16 cardinals in the conclave, and I, perhaps, have half of them. Your Grace, you must see that your faction does not interfere with what these priests desire, my election, namely." "Must?" she repeated, her violet eyes dilating. "Your Eminence has some reputation as a holy man, and you suggest the corruption of the conclave." The Cardinal leant forward in his chair. "I do not play for a saintly fame," he said, "and as for a corrupted conclave, your Grace should know corruption, seeing that your art, and your art alone, achieved the election of Balthasar to the German throne." Isabeau stared at him mutely. He gave a soft laugh. "You are a clever woman," he continued. "Your husband is the first king of the Germans to hold the Empery of the West for 10 years, and keep his heel on the homelands as well. But even your wits will scarcely suffice now. Bohemia revolts, and Basil stretches greedy fingers from Ravenna, and to keep the throne secure you desire a man in the Vatican who is Balthasar's creature." The Empress rose and placed her hand on the gilded ribbing of the window frame. "Your Eminence shows some understanding," she flashed, pale beneath her paint. "We gained the West, and we will keep the West, so you see, my lord, why my influence will be against you, not with you, in the conclave." "Your Grace speaks boldly. You think me your enemy?" "You declare yourself hostile, my lord." "Nay, I may be a good friend to you in St. Peter's." She smiled. "The conclave have not declared their decision yet, your Eminence. You are a great prince, but the imperial party have some power." The Cardinal sat erect, and his intense eyes quelled her despite herself. "Some power, which I ask you to exert in my behalf." She looked away, though angry with herself that his gaze overawed her. "You have declared your ambition, my lord. Your talents and your wealth we know. You are too powerful already for us to tolerate you as master in Rome." "Again you speak boldly," smiled the Cardinal. "Perhaps too boldly. I think you will yet help me to the tiara." Isabeau gave a quick glance at his pale, handsome face framed in the red hair. "Do you seek to bribe me, my lord?" She remembered the vast riches of this man and their own empty treasury. "Nay," said Luigi Caprarola, still smiling. "I threaten." "Threaten?" "I threaten that I will make you an outcast in the streets unless you serve me well." She was the tiger cat now, ready to turn at bay Marozia Porphyrogenitus of Byzantium. "I know that of you," said the Cardinal, "that once revealed would make the Emperor hurl you from his side." She sucked in her breath and waited. "Melchoir of Brabant died by poison and by witchcraft." "All the world knows that." Her eyes were long and evil. "He was bewitched by a young doctor of Frankfort College who perished for the deed." The Cardinal looked down at the hand on his lap. "Yea, that young doctor brewed the potion. You administered it." Isabeau took a step forward into the room. "You lie. I am not afraid of you. You lie most utterly." Luigi Caprarola sprang to his feet. "Silence, woman. Speak not so to me. It is the truth, and I can prove it." The Cardinal still stood and dominated her. "Do you recall a youth who was scrivener to your chamberlain and friend of the young doctor of rhetoric? Thierry his name, born of Dendermonde?" "Yea, he is now dead or in the East." "He is alive and in Rome. He served you well once, Empress, when he came to betray his friend, and you were quick to seize the chance. It suited him then to truckle to you. I think he was afraid of you. He is not now. He knows, and if I bid him he will speak." Isabeau answered swiftly. "I am not of a nation easily cowed, my lord, nor are the people of my blood readily trapped. I can tear your reputed saintship to rags by spreading abroad this tale of how you tried to bargain with me for the popedom." The Cardinal smiled in a way she did not care to see. "But first I say to the Emperor, your wife slew your friend that she might be your wife, your friend Melchoir of Brabant. You loved him better than you loved the woman. Will you not avenge him now?" The Empress pressed her clenched hands against her heart, and with an effort raised her eyes to her accuser's masterful face. "My lord's love against it all," she said hoarsely. "He knows Melchoir's murderer perished in Frankfort in the flames. He knows that I am innocent, and he will laugh at you. Weave what tissues of falsehood you will, sir, I do defy you, and will do no bargaining to set you in the Vatican." The Cardinal rested his fingertips on the arm of the chair and looked down at them with a deepening smile. "You speak," he answered, "as one whom I can admire."
It requires great courage to put the front you do on guilt, but I have certain knowledge of what I say. Come, I will prove to you that you cannot deceive me. You came first to the house of a certain witch in Frankfort on a day in August. A youth opened the door and took you into a room at the back that looked on to a garden growing dark red roses. You knew that he had been driven from Bal College for witchcraft, even as I know you compassed the death of your first husband, and you asked him to help you, even as I ask you to help me now." The Cardinal reseated himself in his gold chair and marked with brilliant, merciless eyes the woman struggling to make a stand against him. "Hugh of Rooselaare died," he said with sudden venom, "died basely for justly accusing you, and so shall you die basely, unless you aid me in the conclave." "Cardinal Caprarola," she said, "you ask me to use my influence to bring about your election to the popedom. Knowing you as I know you now, I cannot fail to see you are a man who would stop at naught. If I help you, I shall help my husband's enemy. Once you are in the Vatican, how long will you tolerate him in Rome? You will be no man's creature, and I think no man's ally. What chance shall we have in Rome once you are master? Sylvester was old and meek, he let Balthasar hold the reins. Will you do that?" "That I will not," said Luigi Caprarola. "If it please me, I will hurl him down and set one of my own followers up. I have no love for Balthasar of Courtrai." Isabeau's face hardened with hate. "But you think he can help you to the tiara?" "Through you, lady. You can tell him I am his friend, his ally, what you will, or you may directly influence the cardinals, I care not, so the thing be done. What I shall do if it be not done, I have said." "Then you are wrong. Neither threats nor bribery can make me do this thing. Say what you will to the Emperor, I am secure in his good affections. Blight my fame, and turn him against me if you can. I am not so mean a woman that fear can make me betray the fortunes of my husband and my son." The Cardinal lowered his eyes. He was very pale. "You dare death," he said, "a shameful death, if my accusation be proved, as proved it shall be." The Empress looked at him over her shoulder. "Dare death!" she cried. "You say I have dared hell for him, shall I be afraid then of paltry death?" Luigi Caprarola's breast heaved beneath the vivid silk of his robe. "Of what are you afraid?" he asked. "Of nothing, save evil to my lord." The Cardinal's lids dropped. He moistened his lips. "This is your answer?" "Yea, your Eminence. All the power I possess shall go to prevent you mounting the throne you covet so. And now, seeing you have that answer, I will leave. My courtiers grow weary in your halls." She moved to the door. As she opened it, the Cardinal turned his head. "Give me a little longer, your Grace," he said softly. "I have yet something to say." She reclosed the door and stood with her back against it. "Well, my lord?" The Cardinal was pale and scornful. His narrow eyes and curving mouth expressed bitterness and passion. "Here is the weapon that shall bring you to your knees," he said, "and make your boasting die upon your lips. You are not the wife of Balthasar, and the only heritage your son will ever have is the shame and weariness of the outcast." "Not his wife? Why, you rave. We were married before all Frankfort. Not Balthasar's wife." "Your lord was wed before." "Yea, I know. What of it?" "This. Ursula of Rooselaare lives." "Ursula of Rooselaare died in Antwerp," she cried wildly, "in the convent of the White Sisters." "She did not. and Balthasar knows she did not. He thinks she died thereafter. He thinks he saw her grave, but he would find it empty. She lives. She is in Rome, and she is his wife, his Empress before God and man." "How do you know this?" She made a last pitiful attempt to brave him, but the terrible Cardinal had broken her strength. The horror of the thing he said had chilled her blood and choked her heartbeats. "The youth who helped you once, the Doctor Constantine. From him Balthasar obtained the news of his wife's death, for Ursula and he were apprenticed to the same old master. Ask Balthasar if this be not so." "Well, the youth lied, for purposes of his own. The maid lived then and is living now, and if I choose it, she will speak." "It is not possible," shuddered the Empress. "No, you wish to drive me mad, and so you torture me. Why did not this woman speak before?" The Cardinal smiled. "She did not love her husband as you do, lady, and so preferred her liberty. You should be grateful. She has his ring, and her wedding deeds, signed by him and by the priest. There are those at Rooselaare who know her, albeit it is near 20 years since she was there. Also she hath the deposition of old Master Lucas that she was a supposed nun when she came to him, and in reality the wife of Balthasar of Courtrai. She can prove no one lies buried in the garden of Master Lucas's house, and she can bring forward sisters of the order to which she belonged to show that she did not die on her wedding day. This and further proof can she show." "She must be silenced. By Christus his mother, she must be silenced." "Secure me the casting vote in the conclave, and she will never speak." "I have said I cannot, for his sake, for my son's sake." "Then I will bring forth Ursula of Rooselaare, and she shall prove herself the Emperor's wife. Then instantly you must leave him, or both of you will be excommunicated. Your alternative will be to stay and be his ruin, or go to obscurity, never seeing his face again. Your son will no longer be King of the Romans, but a nameless wanderer, spurned and pitied by those who should be his subjects, and another woman will sit by Balthasar's side on the throne of the West." For a little while she was silent, and the Cardinal also, as he looked at her. Then she raised her eyes to meet his. Steadily now she kept them at the level of his gaze, and her base, bold blood served her well in the manner of her speech. "Lord Cardinal," she said, "you have won. Before you, as before the world, I stand Balthasar's wife. Nor can you fright me from that proud station by telling of this impostor. Yet I am afraid of you. I dare not come to an issue with you, Luigi Caprarola, and to buy your silence on these matters I will secure your election. And afterwards you and my lord shall see who is the stronger." "We part as enemies," he answered, "but I kiss the hem of your gown, Empress, for you are brave as you are beautiful." He gracefully lifted the purple robe to his lips. "And above all things do I admire a constant woman." His voice was strangely soft. She moved away, steadying her steps with difficulty. The 2 chamberlains in the antechamber rose as she stepped out of the cabinet. "Benedictus, my daughter," smiled the Cardinal, and closed the door. "How she loves him still," he said aloud. "Yet why do I wonder? Is he not as fair a man as—" He broke off, then added reflectively, "Also, she is beautiful." His long fingers felt among his silk robes. He drew forth a little mirror and gazed at his handsome face, with the darkened upper lip and tonsured head. As he looked he smiled, then presently laughed. End of section 25. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 26 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 4, The Dancer in Orange. Thierry walked slowly through the gorgeous ruins of Imperial Rome. It was something after noon and glowingly hot. The Tiber curled in and about the stone houses and broken palaces like a bronze and golden serpent, so smooth and glittering it was. He followed the river until it wound round the base of Mount Aventine, and there he paused and looked up at the Emperor's palace, set splendidly on the hill. A little Byzantine chariot, gilt with azure curtains and drawn by a white horse, came towards him. The occupant was a lady in a green dress. The grooms ran either side of the horse's head to assist it up the hill. The chariot passed Thierry at a walking pace. The lady was unveiled, and the sun was full on her face. It was Jacobea of Martzburg. She did not see him. Her car continued its slow way towards the palace, and Thierry stood staring after it. He had last seen her 10 years and more ago in her steward's arms in the courtyard of Castle Martzburg, beyond them Sebastian's wife. The sound of cymbals and laughter roused him from his agitated thoughts. He looked along the road that wound by the Tiber, and saw a little crowd approaching, evidently following a troop of jugglers or mountebanks. As they came nearer to where he loitered, Thierry, ever easily attracted by any passing excitement or attraction, could not choose but give them a half-sullen attention. The centre of the group was a girl in an orange gown, they who followed her the mere usual citizens of Rome, some courtiers of the emperors, soldiers, merchants' clerks, and the rabble of children, lazy mongrel foreigners and Franks. The dancer stopped and spread a scarlet carpet on the roadway. The crowd gathered about in a circle, and Thierry drew up with the rest, interested by what interested them. The two facts, namely, that marked the girl as different from her kind. Firstly, she affected the unusual modesty or coquetry of a black mask that completely covered her face, and secondly, she was attended only by a hideous ape. Although the mask concealed the charms of her face, it was obvious that she was young, and probably Greek. Her figure was tall, full, and splendidly graceful. She held a pair of brass cymbals and struck them with a stormy joyousness above her proud head. The ape, wearing a collar of bright red stones and a long blue jacket trimmed with spangles, curled himself on the corner of the carpet and went to sleep. The girl began dancing. She had no music save her cymbals, and needed none. Suddenly she lowered the cymbals, struck them together before her breast, and looked from right to left. Thierry caught the gleam of her dark eyes through the holes in her mask. For a while she crouched together, panting, then drew herself erect and let her hands fall apart. The burning sun shone in her hair, in the metal hems of her robe, in her sandals, and changed the cymbals into discs of fire. She began to sing. Her voice was deep and glorious, though muffled by the mask. Slowly she moved round the red carpet, and the words of her song fell clearly on the hot air. If love were all, his perfect servant I would be, kissing where his foot might fall, doing him homage on a lowly knee. If love were all, if love were all, and no such thing as pride nor empery, nor God, nor sins or great or small, if love were all. She passed Thierry so close her fluttering robe touched his slack hand. He looked at her curiously, for he thought he knew her voice. He had heard many women sing, and somewhere this one. If love were all, but love is weak, and hate oft giveth him a fall, and wisdom smites him on the cheek. If love were all,
if love were all, and I had lived glad and meek, nor heard ambition call, and valor speak, if love were all.
The song ended as it had begun, on a clash of cymbals. The dancer swung round, stamped her foot, and called fiercely to the ape, who leapt up and began running round the crowd, offering a shell and making an ugly jabbering noise. Theirry flung the hideous thing a silver bezant and moved away. He was thinking, not of the dancer with the unknown memory in her voice, but of the lady in the gilt chariot behind the azure curtains. Jacobea, how little she had changed. A burst of laughter made him look round. He saw a quick picture, the girl's orange dress flashing in the strong sunlight, the ape on her shoulder hurling the contents of the shell in the air, which glittered for a second with silver pieces, and the jesting crowd closing round both. He passed on moodily into the centre of the town. In the unrest and agitation of his thoughts he had determined to seek Cardinal Caprarola, since the Cardinal gave no sign of sending for him, even of remembering him. But today it was useless to journey to the palace on the Palatine, for the conclave sat in the Vatican, and the Cardinal would be of their number. The streets, the wine shops, the public squares were full of a mixed and excited mob, the adherents of the Emperor, who wished to see a German pontiff, and they who were ardent Romans or churchmen came, here and there, to open brawls. The endless processions that crossed and recrossed from the various monasteries and churches were interrupted by the lawless jeers of the Frankish inhabitants, who, under a strong emperor and a weak pope, had begun to assume the bearing of conquerors. Theirry left them all, too concerned as always in his own small affairs to have any interest in larger issues. He turned into the Via Sacra, and there, under the splendid but broken arch of Constantine, he saw again the dancing girl and her ape. She looked at him intently, of that he could have no doubt, despite her mask, and as he turned his hesitating steps toward the Palatine, she rose and followed him. As he ascended the narrow grey road that wound above the city, he kept looking over his shoulder, and she was always there, following, with the ape on her shoulder. They passed scattered huts, monasteries, decaying temples and villas, and came out on to the deserted stretches of the upper Palatine, where the fragmentary glories of another world lay under the cypress and olive trees. Here Theirry paused and again looked, half fearfully, for the bright figure of the dancer. She stood not far from him, leaning against a slender shaft of marble, the sole remaining column of a temple to some heathen god. Theirry flung himself on a low marble seat that stood in the shade of a cypress, and his blood-red robe was vivid even in the shadow. He looked at the veiled city at his feet, and at the dancing girl resting against the time-stained moss-grown column. She loosened the cymbals from her hands and flung them on the ground. The ape jumped from her shoulder and caught them up. Again she sang her passionate little song. As she sang, another and very different scene was suddenly brought to Theirry's mind. He remembered a night when he had slept on the edge of a pine forest, in Germany, many years ago, and had suddenly awoke. Nay, he had dreamt he heard singing, and a woman singing. If it were not so mad a thought, he would have said, "This woman singing." He turned bitter dark eyes towards her. Why had she followed him? Swiftly and lightly she came across the grass, glittering from head to foot in the sunlight, and paused before him. "Certes, you should be in Rome today," she said. "The conclave come to their decision this afternoon. Do you wish to hear it announced from the Vatican?" "Nay," smiled Theirry, "I would rather see you dance." Her answer was mocking. You care nothing for my dancing. I would wager to stir any man in Rome sooner than you." Theirry flushed. "Why did you follow me?" he asked in a half indifferent dislike. She seated herself on the other end of his marble bench. "My reasons are better than my dancing, and would, could I speak them, have more effect on you." She leant towards him across the length of the bench, and the perfume of her orange garments mingled with the odour of the violets. "Take me for something other than what I appear," she continued in a mournful and passionate voice. "In being here I risk an unthinkable fate. I stake the proudest hopes, the fairest fortune." "Who are you?" cried Theirry. "Why are you masked?" She drew back instantly, and her tone changed to scorn again. "When there are many pilgrims in Rome, the monks bid us poor fools wear masks, lest with our silly faces we lure souls away from God." Theirry was silent. The dancing girl laughed softly. "Are you thinking of her?" she asked. He turned with a start. "Thinking of whom?" he demanded. "The lady in the Byzantine chariot, Jacobea of Martzburg?" He sprang up. "Who are you, and what do you know of me?" "This, at least, that you have not forgotten her, yet you would be emperor too, would you not?" "Ye are some witch," he said. "I come from Thessaly, where we have skill in magic," she answered, and now she sat erect, her yellow dress casting a glowing reflection into the marble. "And I tell you this," she added passionately, "if you would be emperor, let that woman be. She will do naught for you. Let her go. This is a warning, Theirry of Dendermonde." His face flushed, his eyes sparkled. "Have I a chance of wearing the imperial crown?" he cried. "May I rule the West? Tell me that, witch." She whistled the ape on her side. "I am no witch, but I warn you to think no more of Jacobea of Martzburg." He answered hotly. "I love not to hear her name on your tongue. She is nothing to me. I need not your warning." The dancer rose. "For your own sake, forget her, Theirry of Dendermonde, and you may be indeed Emperor of the West and Caesar of the Romans." "How came you by your knowledge?" he asked, and clutched the cypress trunk. "I read your fortune in your eyes," she answered. "We in Thessaly have skill in these things, as I have said. Look at the city beneath us. Is it not worth much to reign in it?" The gold vapour that lay about the distant hills seemed to be resolving into heavy menacing clouds. Theirry, following the direction of her slender pointing finger, gazed at the city and saw the clouds beyond. "A storm gathers," he said, and knew not why he shivered suddenly until his pearl earrings tinkled on the collar round his neck. The dancer laughed wildly and musically. "Come with me to the Piazza of St. Peter," she said, "and you shall hear strange words." With that she caught hold of his blood-red garments and drew him towards the city. As they went down the road that wound through the glorious desolation, Theirry heard the sound of pattering feet and looked over his shoulder. It was the ape who followed them. He walked on his hind legs. How tall he was! Theirry had not thought him so large, nor of such a human semblance. The dancer was silent, and Theirry could not speak. When they entered the city gates, the dun-coloured clouds had swallowed up the gold vapour and half covered the sky. As they crossed the Tiber and neared the Vatican, the last beams of the sun disappeared under the shadow of the oncoming storm. Enormous crowds were gathered in the Piazza of St. Peter. It seemed as if all Rome had assembled there. Many faces were turned towards the sky, and the sudden gloom that had overspread the city seemed to infect the people, for they were mostly silent, even sombre. The enormous and terrible ape cleared an easy way for himself through the crowd, and Theirry and the dancing girl followed until they had pushed through the press of people and found themselves under the windows of the Vatican. "I cannot see," she said, "not even the window." He, with an instinct to assist her, and an impulse to use his strength, caught her round the waist and lifted her up. For a second her breast touched his. He felt her heart beating violently behind her thin robe, and an extraordinary sensation took possession of him, occasioned by the touch of her, the sense of her in his arms. There was communicated, as if from her heart to his, a high and rapturous passion. It was the most terrible and the most splendid feeling he had ever known, at once an agony and a delight such as he had never dreamed of before. Unconsciously he gave an exclamation and loosened his hold. She slipped to the ground with a stifled and miserable cry. "Let me alone," she said wildly. "Let me alone." "Who are you?" he whispered excitedly, and tried to catch hold of her again, but the great ape came between them, and the seething crowd roughly pushed him. Cardinal Maria Orsini had stepped out on to one of the balconies of the Vatican. He looked over the expectant crowd, then up at the black and angry sky, and seemed for a moment to hesitate. When he spoke, his words fell into a great stillness. "The Sacred College has elected a successor to Saint Peter in the person of Louis of Dendermonde, Abbot of the Brethren of the Sacred Heart in Paris, Bishop of Ostia, and Cardinal Caprarola, who will ascend the papal throne under the name of Michael II." He finished. The cries of triumph from the Romans, the yells of rage from the Franks, were drowned in a sudden and awful peal of thunder. The lightning darted across the black heavens, and fell on the Vatican and Castel San Angelo. The clouds were rent in two behind the temple of Mars the Avenger, and a thunderbolt fell with a hideous crash into the Forum of Augustus. Theirry, whipped with terror, turned with the frightened crowd to flee. He heard the dancing girl laugh, and tried to snatch at her orange garments, but she swept by him and was lost in the surge. Rome quivered under the onslaught of the thunder, and the lightning alone lit the murky, hot gloom. "The reign of the Antichrist has begun!" shrieked Theirry, and laughed insanely. End of section 26. Recording by Molly Craig.
Section 27 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 5, The Pope. The chamber in the Vatican was so dimly, richly lit with jeweled and deep-colored lamps that at first Theirry thought himself alone. He looked round and saw silver walls hung with tapestries of violet and gold, pillars with columns of sea-green marble and capitals of shining mosaic supported a roof encrusted with jasper and jade. The floor, of Numidian marble, was spread with Indian silk carpets. Here and there stood crystal bowls of roses, white and crimson fainting in the close, sweet air. At the far end of the room was a dais, and Theirry, as his eyes became used to the wine-coloured gloom, saw that someone sat there, someone so splendidly robed and so still that it seemed more like one of the images Theirry had seen worshipped in Constantinople than a human being. He shivered. Presently he could discern intense eyes looking at him out of a dazzle of dark gold and shimmering shadowed colours. Michael II moved in his seat. "You sent for me," said Theirry. To himself his voice sounded hoarse and unnatural. "At last." "At last?" "I have been waiting. You have been Pope 30 days, and never have you given me a sign. Is 30 days so long? You have done nothing for me. You spoke of favours." "Favours?" echoed Michael. "You are the only man in Christendom who would stand in my presence. The Emperor kneels to kiss my foot." "The Emperor does not know," shuddered Theirry. "But I do. and knowing, I cannot kneel to you. Ah, God, how can you dare it?" The Pope's soft voice came from the shadows. "Your moods change, first this, then that. What humour are you in now, Thierry of Dendermonde? Would you still be Emperor?" Thierry put his hand to his brow. "Yea, you know it. Why do you torture me with suspense, with waiting? If evil is to be my master, let me serve him and be rewarded." The Pope held back the blossom-strewn brocade so that he could see the other's face. "I ask of you to let Jacobea of Martzburg be." Thierry flushed. "How ye have always hated her! Since I came to Rome I have seen her the once." The Pope's smooth pale face showed a stain of red from the dim beams of one of the splendid lamps. Thierry observed it as he leant forward. "She did not marry her steward," he said. The Pope's eyes narrowed. "Ye have been at the pains to discover that?" Thierry laughed mournfully. "You have won. You, sitting where you sit now, can afford to mock at me, at my love, at my hope, both of which I placed once at stake on her, and lost. 10 years ago, but having again seen her, sometimes I must think of her, and that she was not vile after all, but only trapped by you, as I have been. Sebastian went to Palestine, and she has gone unwed." The Pope gave a quick sigh and bit his lip. "I will make you Emperor," he said, "but that woman shall not be your Empress. Did I love her even, which I do not, I would put her gladly aside to sit on the imperial throne. Come, I have dallied long enough on the brink of devilry, let me sin grandly now and be grandly paid." Michael II gave so quick a breath the jewels on his breast scattered coloured light. "Come nearer to me," he commanded, "and take my hand, as you used to in Frankfort. I am always Dirk to you. You who never cared for me, hated me, I think. Oh, the traitors our hearts are, neither God nor devil is so fierce to fight." Thierry approached the gold steps. The Pope leant down and gave him his cool white hand, heavy with gemmed rings, and looked intently into his eyes. "When they announced your election, how the storm smote the city," whispered Thierry fearfully. "Were you not daunted?" The Pope withdrew his hand. "I was not in the conclave," he said in a strange tone. "I lay sick in my villa. As for the storm—" "It has not lifted since," breathed Thierry. "Day and night have the clouds hung over Rome. Is not there, after all, a God?" "Silence!" cried the Pope in a troubled voice. "You would be Emperor of the West, would you not? Let us speak of that." Thierry leant against the arm of the throne and stared with an awful fascination into the other's face. "Ay, let us speak of that," he answered wildly. "Can all your devilries accomplish it? It is common talk in Rome that you secured your election by Frankish influence because you vowed to league with Balthasar. They say you are his ally. Nevertheless, I will cast him down and set you in his place. He comes today to ask my aid against Lombardy and Bohemia, and therefore I have sent for you, that you may overhear this audience and see how I mate and checkmate an emperor for your sake." As he spoke he pointed to the other end of the room, where hung a sombre and rich curtain. "Conceal yourself behind that tapestry and listen carefully to what I say, and you will understand how I may humble Balthasar and shake him from his throne." Thierry, not joyous nor triumphant, but agitated and trembling with a horrible excitement, crept across the room and passed silently behind the arras. As the long folds shook into place again, the Pope touched a bell. Paolo Orsini entered. "Admit the Emperor." The secretary withdrew. There was a soft sound in the antechamber, the voices of priests. A heavy tread sounded without, and the Emperor advanced into the splendid glooms of the audience chamber. He was bareheaded, and at sight of the awe-inspiring figure went on his knees at the foot of the dais. Michael II looked at him in silence. The silver door was closed and they were alone, save for the unseen listener behind the arras. At last the Pope said slowly, "Arise, my son." The Emperor stood erect, showing his magnificent height and bearing. "Your Holiness knows that it is my humble desire to form a firm alliance between Rome and Germany. I have ruled both long enough to prove myself neither weak nor false. I have ever been a faithful servant of Holy Church." Michael II smiled. "On what right does your Grace presume when you ask us to aid you in steadying a trembling throne?" "I was assured, Holy Father, of your friendliness before the election. The Empress—" Again the Pope cut him short. "Cardinal Caprarola was not the vicegerent of Christ, the high priest of Christendom, as we are now, and those whom Louis of Dendermonde knew became as nothing before the Pope of Rome, in whose estimate all men are the same." "Your Holiness can have no object in refusing my alliance," he answered. "Sylvester crowned me with his own hands, and I always lived in friendship with him. He aided me with troops when the Lombards rebelled against their suzerain, and Suabia he placed under an interdict." "We are not Sylvester," said the Pope haughtily, "nor accountable for his doings; as you may show yourself the obedient son of the Church, so may we support you. Otherwise we can denounce as we can uphold, pull down as we can raise up, and it wants but little, Balthasar of Courtrai, to shake your throne from under you." The Emperor bit his lip, and the scales of his mail gleamed as they rose with his heavy breathing. He knew that if the power of the Vatican was placed on the side of his enemies he was ruined. "In what way have I offended your Holiness?" he asked with what humility he could. "Ye have offended Heaven, for whom we stand," he answered, "and until by penitence ye assoil your soul, we must hold you outcast from the mercies of the Church." "Tell me my sins," said Balthasar hoarsely, "and what I can do to blot them out. Masses, money, lands? None of these can make your peace with God and us, only one thing can avail there." "Tell it me," cried the Emperor eagerly. "If it be a crusade, surely I will go, after Lombardy is subdued." The Pope flashed a quick glance over him. "We want no knight erranty in the East. We demand this, that you put away the woman whom you call your wife." Balthasar stared with dilating eyes. "Saint Joris guard us," he muttered. "The woman whom I call my wife?" "Ysabeau, first wedded to the man whom you succeeded." "I do not understand, your Holiness." The Pope turned in his chair so that the lamplight made his robe one bright purple sheen. "Come here, my lord." The Emperor advanced to the gold steps. A slim fair hand was held out to him, holding between finger and thumb a ring set with a deep red stone. Balthasar of Courtrai looked at the ring. Round the bezel 2 coats of arms were delicately engraved in the soft red gold. "Why," he said in a troubled way, "I know the ring, yea, it was made many years ago. The woman to whom in your name it was given still lives." "Ursula of Rooselaare?" cried Balthasar. "Yea, Ursula of Rooselaare, your wife." "My first wife, who died before I had seen her, Holiness," stammered the Emperor. "Who told you she was dead?" continued the Pope. "A certain youth who for his ends, I think, lied. A wicked youth he was, and he died in Frankfort for compassing the death of the late Emperor, or escaped that end by firing his house. The tale grows faint with years. 'Twas he who told you Ursula of Rooselaare was dead, even showed you her grave, and you were content to take his word, and she was content to be silent." "Oh, Christus!" cried the Emperor. "Oh, Saint Joris! But, Holy Father, This thing is impossible." He wrung his hands together and beat his mailed breast. "From whom had you this tale?" "From Ursula of Rooselaare." "It cannot be. Why was she silent all these years? Why did she allow me to take Ysabeau to wife?" A wild expression crossed the Pope's face. He looked beyond the Emperor with deep, soft eyes. "Because she loved another man." A pause fell for a second, then Michael II spoke again. "I think too she something hated you who had failed her and scorned her. There was her father also, who died shamefully by Ysabeau's command. She meant, I take it, to revenge that upon the Empress, and now perhaps her chance has come. Where is this woman who has so influenced your Holiness against me? An impostor, do not listen to her." "She speaks the truth, as God and devils know," flashed the Pope, "and we, with all the weight of Holy Church, will support her in the maintenance of her just rights. We also have no love for this Eastern woman who slew her lord." "Nay, that is false." Balthasar ground his teeth. "I know some said it of her, but it is a lie." "This to me," cried the Pope. "Beware how ye anger God's vicegerent. I bend my neck for your Holiness to step on, so you do not ask me to listen to evil of the Empress. Ysabeau is not Empress, nor your wife. Her son is not your heir, and you must presently part with both of them, or suffer the extremity of our wrath. Yea, the woman shall ye give into the hands of the executioner to suffer for the death of Melchoir, and the child shall ye turn away from you, and with pains and trouble shall ye search for Ursula of Rooselaare, and finding her, cause her to be acknowledged your wife and Empress of the West. That she lives I know, the rest is for you." "I have but one answer," said Balthasar, "and it would be the same did I deliver it in the face of God, that while I live and have breath to speak I shall proclaim Ysabeau and none other as my wife, and our son as an Empress's son, and my heir and successor. Kingdom and even life may your Holiness despoil me of, but neither the armies of the earth nor the angels of heaven shall take from me these two. This my answer to your Holiness." The Pope resumed his seat. "Ye dare to defy me?" he said. "Well, ye are a foolish man to set yourself against heaven. Go back and live in sin and wait the judgment." Balthasar's flesh crept and quivered, but he held his head high, even though the Pope's words opened the prospect of a sure hell. Michael II gazed at him in silence as he bent his head and backed towards the silver door. Presently he rose and descended from the dais. The dark arras was lifted cautiously, and Theirry crept into the room. "What you said was false?" whispered Theirry questioningly. The jewelled light flickered over the Pope's face. "Nay, it was true. Ursula of Rooselaare lives. I would like to see her. Who is it that she loves?" The Pope showed pale. He moved slowly across the room with his head bent. "A man for whose sake she puts her very life in jeopardy," he said in a low, passionate voice. "A man, I think, who is unworthy of her." The Pope lifted an arras that concealed an inner door. "The first move is made," he said. "Farewell now. I will acquaint you of the progress of your fortunes." He gave a slight, queer smile. "As for Ursula of Rooselaare, ye have seen her." "Seen her?" "Yea, she wears the disguise of a masked dancer in orange." With that he pointed Theirry to the concealed doorway, and turning, left him. End of section 27. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 28 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 6. San Giovanni in Laterano. In the palace on the Aventine, Balthasar stood at a window looking over Rome. The clouds that had hung for weeks over the city
cast a dull yellow glow over marble and stone. The air was hot and sultry. Now and then thunder rolled over the Vatican, and a flash of lightning revealed the angel on Castel San Angelo, poised above the muddy waters of the Tiber. A furious, utter dread and terror gripped Balthasar's heart. Days had passed since his defiance of the Pope, and he had heard no more of his daring, but he was afraid of Michael II, of the Church, of heaven behind it, afraid of this woman who had risen from the dead. He knew the number of his enemies and with what difficulty he held Rome. He guessed that the Pope intended his downfall and to put another in his place, but not this almost certain ruin disturbed him day and night. No, the thought that the Church might throw him out and consign his soul to the smoky hell. Bravely enough he had dared the Pope at the time when his heart was hot within him, but in the days that followed his very soul had fainted to think what he had done. He could not sleep, nor rest while waiting for outraged heaven to strike. He darkly believed the continual storm brooding over Rome to be omen of God's wrath with him. His trouble was the greater because it was secret, the first that since they had been wedded he had concealed from Isabeau. As this touched her in an infamous and horrible manner, he could neither breathe it to her nor any other, and the loneliness of his miserable apprehension was an added torture. This morning he had interviewed the envoys from Germany and his chamberlain. Tales of anarchy and turmoil in Rome, of rebellion in Germany, had further distracted him. Now alone in his little marble cabinet he stared across the gorgeous, storm-wrapped city. Not long ago he heard someone quietly enter, and because he knew who it was he would not turn his head. She came up to him and laid her hand on his plain brown doublet. "Balthasar," she said, "will you never tell me what it is that sits so heavily on your heart?" He commanded his voice to answer, "Nothing, Ysabeau, nothing." "Oh, my lord!" she cried passionately. "No anguish is so bitter when shared." "Certes, you know my troubles, Ysabeau, the discontent, the factions, matter enough to make any man grave." "And the Pope," she said, raising her eyes to his. "Most of all it is the Pope." "His Holiness is no friend to me," said the Emperor in a low voice. "Oh, Ysabeau, we were deceived to aid him to the Tiara." She shuddered. "I persuaded you, blame me. I was mad. I set your enemy in authority." "Nay," he answered in a great tenderness, "you are to blame for nothing, you, sweet Ysabeau." She saw it and terror shook her. "He said more to you that day than you will tell me," she cried. "You fear something that you will not reveal to me." "He is a poor knight who tells his lady of his difficulties," he said. "I cannot come crying to you like a child." "I am very jealous of you, Balthasar," she said thickly. "Jealous that you should shut me out from anything." "You will know soon enough," he answered in a hoarse voice, "but never from me." "Are we not as strong as this man, Balthasar?" "Nay," he shivered, "for he has the Church behind him. To-morrow we shall see him again. I dread to-morrow." "Why?" she asked thickly. "To-morrow is the feast of the Assumption, and we go to the Basilica." "Yea, and the Pope will be there in his power, and I must kneel humbly before him, yet not that alone." "Balthasar, what do you fear?" He breathed heavily. "Nothing, a folly, an ugly presentiment. Of late I have slept so little. Why is he quiet? He meditates something." His blue eyes widened with fear. He put the Empress gently from him. "Take no heed, sweet, I am only weary, and your dear solicitude unnerves me.
I must go pray Saint Joris to remember me." Angry scorn filled her heart when she considered the reputation this man had won in his youth. That indeed he still bore with some, yet it could not but stir her admiration to reflect what it must have cost a man of the Pope's nature to play the ascetic saint for so many years. But his piety had been well rewarded. The poor Flemish youth sat in the Vatican now, lord of her husband's fortunes and her own honour. Then she fell to pondering over the story of Ursula of Rooselaare, wondering where she was, where she had been these years, and how she had met Cardinal Caprarola. The Empress dwelt on these things till her head ached. She was interrupted by the entry of a lady, tall and fair, leading a beautiful child by the hand, Jacobea of Martzburg, and Isabeau's son. "We seek for his grace," smiled the lady. "Wenceslas wishes to say his Latin lesson, and to tell the tale of the 3 dukes and the sack of gold that he has lately learnt." The Empress gave her son a quick glance. "You shall tell it to me, Wenceslas, my lord is not here." The boy, golden, large and glorious to look upon, scowled at her. The prince tossed his yellow curls. "I want my father." Jacobea, in pity of the Empress's distracted bearing, tried to pacify him. The Empress crushed back the wild misery of her thoughts and caught the child's embroidered yellow sleeve. "Certes, ye shall see him," she said quietly. "If he promised you, I think he is in the oratory. We will wait at the door until he come forth." The boy kissed her hand, and the shadow passed from his lovely face. Jacobea saw the Empress look down on him with a desperate and heartbroken expression. She wondered at the anguish revealed to her in that second, but she was neither disturbed nor touched. Her own heart had been broken so long ago that all emotions were but names to her. The Empress dismissed her with a glance. Jacobea left the palace, mounted the little Byzantine chariot with the blue curtains, and drove to the church of San Giovanni in Laterano. She went there every day to hear a mass sung for the soul of one who had died long ago. A large portion of her immense fortune had gone in paying for masses and candles for the repose of Sybilla, one-time wife of Sebastian, her steward. If gold could send the murdered woman there, Jacobea had opened to her the doors of paradise. In her quiet monotonous life in a strange land, caring for none and by none cared for, with a dead heart in her bosom and leaden feet walking heavily the road to the grave, this Sybilla had come to be with Jacobea the most potent thing she knew. Neither Balthasar nor the Empress nor any of their court were so real to her as the steward's dead wife. There were a few people in the church kneeling for the Angelus. Jacobea joined them and fixed her eyes on the altar where a strong purple light glowed and flickered, bringing out points of gold in the moulding of the ancient arches. A deep hush held the scented stillness. The scattered bent figures were dark and motionless against the mystic clouds of incense and the soft bright lights. Monks in long brown habits came and stood in the chancel, the bell struck the hour, and young novices entered singing, Angelus Domini nuntiavit Mariae, et concepit de Spiritu Sancto. The monks knelt and folded their hands on their breasts. The response, that still seemed very sweet to Jacobea, arose. Ave Maria, gratia plena. A side door near Jacobea opened softly, and a man stepped into the church. A strong sense that the newcomer was observing her made Jacobea turn, almost unconsciously, her head towards him as she repeated the Ave Maria.
A tall, richly dressed man was gazing at her intently. His face was in shadow, but she could see long pearls softly gleam in his ears. Priests and novices left the church, the monks filed out and bent figures rose. The man stepped from the shadows as Jacobea rose to her feet, and their eyes met. " You remember me?" asked Theirry faintly. " I have forgotten nothing," she answered calmly. " Why do you seek to recall yourself to me?" " I cannot see you and let you pass." " Are you free of the devils?" she asked, and crossed herself. Theirry winced. He remembered that she believed Dirk was dead, that she thought of the Pope as a holy man. " Forgive me," he murmured. "For what?" " Ah, that I did not understand you to be always a saintly woman." Jacobea laughed sadly. " You must not think of the past, though you may think of nothing else, even as I do. We might have been friends once, but the devil was too strong for us." At that moment Theirry hated Dirk passionately. He felt he could have been happy with this woman, and with her only in the whole world, and he loathed Dirk for making it impossible. As she moved towards the door he came beside her. Then by a common impulse both stopped. Round one of the dark glittering pillars a brilliant figure flashed into the rich light, the masked dancer in orange. She stepped up to Theirry and laid her fingers on his scarlet sleeve. " How does Theirry of Dendermonde keep his word?" she mocked, and her eyes gleamed from their holes. " Is your heart of a feather's weight that it flutters this way and that with every breath of air?" " What does she mean?" asked Jacobea, as the man flushed and shuddered. " And what does she here in this attire?" The dancer turned to her swiftly. " What of one who drags his weary limbs beneath a Syrian sun in penitence for a deed ye urged him to?" she said in the same tone. Jacobea stepped back with a quick cry, and Theirry seized the dancer's arm. " Begone," he said threateningly. " I know you, or who you feign to be." She answered between laughter and fear. " Let me go. I have not hurt you. Why are you angry, my brave knight?" At the sound of her voice, that she in no way lowered, a monk came forward and sternly ordered her from the church. The dancer laughed. " So I am flung out of the house of God? Well, sir and sweet lady, will you come to the mass at the Basilica to morrow? Nay, do, it will be worth beholding. The Basilica to morrow — I shall be there." With that she darted before them and slipped from the church. Man and woman shuddered and knew not why. A peal of thunder rolled, the walls of the church shook, and an image of the Virgin was hurled to the marble pavement and shivered into fragments. End of section 28, recording by Molly Craig. Section 29 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 7, The Vengeance of Michael II. From every church and convent in Rome the bells rang out. It was the feast of the Assumption and holiday in the city. Strange heavy clouds still obscured the sky, and intermittent thunder echoed in the distance. The Basilica of St. Peter was crowded from end to end. The vast congregation all knelt upon the marble floor, save the Emperor and his wife, who sat under a violet canopy placed opposite the pulpit. Between them on a lower step of the dais stood their little son, gleaming in white satin and overawed by the glitter and the silence. Surrounding the throne were ladies, courtiers, Frankish knights, members of the council, German margraves, Italian nobles, envoys from France, Spain, and resplendent Greeks from the court of Basel. Theirry, kneeling in the press, distinguished the calm face of Jacobea of Martzburg among the dames of the Empress's retinue,
but he sought in vain through the immense and varied crowd for the dancer in orange. A faint chant rose from the sacristy, jewelled crosses showed above the heads of the multitude as the monks entered holding them aloft. The fresh voices of the choristers came nearer, acolytes took their places round the altar, and the blue clouds of incense floated over the hushed multitude. The bells ceased. The rise and fall of singing filled the basilica. Cardinal Orsini, followed by a number of priests, went slowly down the aisle towards the open bronze doors. His brilliant dalmatica shivered into gleaming light as he moved. At the doors he paused. The pontifical train was arriving in a gorgeous dazzle of colour and motion. Michael II stepped from a gilt car drawn by 4 white oxen, whose polished horns were wreathed with roses white and red. Preceded by cardinals, the vivid tints of whose silk robes burnt in the golden brightness of the basilica, the Pope passed down the aisle, while the congregation crouched low on their knees and hid their faces. Emperor and Empress rose. He looked at his son, but she at the pontiff, who took no heed of either. Monks, priests and novices moved away from the high altar, where the rows upon rows of candles shone like stars against the sparkling, incense-laden air. He passed to his gold and ivory seat, and the cardinals took their places beside him. The Empress put her hand over her eyes, her jewels seemed so heavy they must drag her from the throne. The crown galled at her brow. The little Wenceslas stood motionless, a bright colour in his cheeks, his eyes brilliant with excitement. Now and then the Emperor looked at him in a secretive, piteous manner. There was an involuntary stir among the people as the rich voices of the men took up the singing at the end of the epistle, a movement of joy, of pleasure in the triumphant music. Then the Pope moved, descended slowly from the dais and mounted the steps of the high altar, his train upheld by 2 archbishops. Emperor and Empress knelt with the rest as he performed the office of the mass, and intense stillness held the rapt assembly, but as he turned and displayed the host before the vast multitude who hid their eyes as he held it like a captured star above the hushed splendour of the altar, a crash of thunder shook the very foundations of the church, and the walls shivered as if mighty forces beat on them without. Michael II, the only man erect in the crouching multitude, smiled slowly as he replaced the Eucharist. Lightning darted through the high coloured windows and quivered a moment before it was absorbed in the rich lights. Down the chancel came a tall monk in the robe of the Order of the Black Penitents. His arms were folded, his hands hidden in his sleeves, his deep cowl cast his face into utter shadow. " I thought Cardinal Colonna preached," whispered Balthasar fearfully, as the monk ascended the pulpit. " I know not this man." The monk drew from his sleeve a parchment from which swung a mighty seal. Slowly he unfurled it. The Empress crouched closer to Balthasar. The monk began to speak, and both to Ysabeau and her husband the voice was familiar, a voice that had been long silent in death. " In the name of Michael II, servant of servants of God and vicegerent of Christ, I herewith pronounce the anathema over Balthasar of Courtrai, Emperor of the West, over Ysabeau, born Marozia Porphyrogenitus, over their son Wenceslas, over their followers, servants and hosts. I herewith expel them from the pale of Holy Church and curse them as heretics. I forbid any to offer them shelter, food or help. I hurl on their heads the wrath of God and the hatred of man. I forbid any to attend their sickbed, to receive their confession or to bury their bodies. I cut asunder the ties that bind the Latin people in obedience to them, and I lay under an interdict any person, village, town or state that succours or aids them against our wrath, May they and their children and their children's children be blighted and cursed in life, and in death may they taste misery and desolation on the earth before they go to everlasting torment in hell." And now the cowled monk caught up one of the candles that lit the pulpit and held it aloft. "May their race perish with them, and their memories be swallowed in oblivion, thus, as I extinguish this flame, may the hand of God extinguish them." He cast the candle on to the marble floor beneath the pulpit. The flame was immediately dashed out, a slow smoke curled an instant and vanished. "For Balthasar of Courtrai cherishes a murderess on the throne, and until he cast her forth and receive his true wife, this anathema rests upon his head." Emperor and Empress listened, holding each other's hands and staring at the monk. As he ended, and while the awe of utter fear held the assembly numb, Ysabeau rose. But at that same instant the monk tossed back his cowl and revealed the stern, pale features of Melchoir of Brabant, crowned with the imperial diadem. A frenzied shriek broke from the woman, and she fell across the steps of the throne. Her crown slipped from her fair head and dazzled up on the pavement. Groaning in anguish, Balthasar stood to raise her up. When he again looked at the pulpit, it was empty. Ysabeau's cry had loosened the souls of the multitude. They rose to their feet and began to surge wildly towards the door. But the pontiff rose, approached the altar, and began calmly to chant the Gratias. Balthasar gave him a wild and desperate look, staggered and fiercely recovered himself, then took his child by the hand, and supporting with the other the Empress, who struggled back to life, he swept down the aisle, followed by a few of his German knights. The people shuddered away to right and left to give him passage. The bronze doors were opened, and the excommunicated man stepped into the thunder-wrapped streets of the city, where he no longer reigned. End of section 29. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 30 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 8, Ursula of Rooselaare. "Say I have done well for you. It seems that I must ask your thanks." The Pope sat at a little table near the window of his private room in the Vatican, and rested his face on his hand. Leaning against the scarlet tapestries that covered the opposite wall was Theirry, clothed in chain mail and heavily armed. "Yea," answered Theirry, "and is it for my sake ye have done this?" "Must you question it?" returned Michael, with a quick breath. "Yea, for your sake, to make you, as I promised, Emperor of the West. My vengeance had else been more quietly satisfied." He laughed. "I have not forgotten all my magic." Theirry winced. "The vision in the basilica was proof of that. What are you who can bring back the hallowed dead to aid your schemes?" "Do you think I am not human, Theirry?" He gave a sigh. "If you would believe in me, trust me, be faithful to me, why, our friendship would be the lever to move the universe, and you and I would rule the world between us. But this is truth. If again you forsake me, you bring about your own downfall. Stand by me, and I will share with you the dominion of this earth. This, I say, is truth." Theirry laughed unhappily. "Sweet devil, there is no God, and I have no soul. There, do not fear, I shall be very faithful to you, since what is there for man save to glut his desires of pomp and wealth and power?" He moved from the wall and took a quick turn about the room. "And yet I know not," he cried. "Can all your magic, all your learning, all your riches keep you where you are? The clouds hang angrily over Rome, nor have they lifted since Orsini announced you Pope. The people riot in the streets, all beautiful things are dead. Many see ghosts and devils walking at twilight across the Maremma.
The powers that put me here can keep me here, be you but true to me. I will be Emperor." Theirry grasped his sword hilt fiercely. "Though the world I rule rot about me, though ghouls and fiends make my imperial train, I will join hands with Antichrist and see if there be a God or no." The Pope rose. "You must go against Balthasar. You must defeat his hosts and bring to me his Empress. Then will I crown you in St. Peter's." Theirry pressed his hand to his forehead. "We start tomorrow with the dawn, beneath the banner of God his Church, I in this mail ye gave me, tempered and forged in hell." "Until then, stay in the Vatican," said Michael II. suddenly. "My prelates and my nobles know you for their leader now." "Nay," Theirry flushed as he answered. "I must go to my own abode in the city." "Jacobea of Martzburg is still in Rome," said the other. "Do you leave me to go to her?" "What is Jacobea to me?" demanded Theirry desperately. "Why did you approach her after her devotions in San Giovanni in Laterano? Speak to her and recall yourself to her mind? You know that. Ah, it was the dancer, your accomplice. What mystery is this?" he asked in a distracted way. "Why does not Ursula of Rooselaare come forth under her true name and confound the Emperor? Why does she follow me, and in such a guise?" Without looking at him, Michael answered. "Maybe because she is very wise, maybe because she is a very fool. Let her pass, she has served her turn. You say you do not go to palter with Jacobea, then farewell until tomorrow. I have much to do. Farewell, Theirry." Theirry left the rich scented chamber and the vast halls of the Vatican, and passed into the riotous and lawless streets of Rome. The storm that had hung so unnaturally long over the city had affected the people. Bravos and assassins crept from their hiding places in the catacombs or the Palatine, and flaunted in the streets. The wine shops were filled with mongrel soldiers of all nations, attracted by the declaration of war from the surrounding towns. Blasphemers mocked openly at the processions of monks and pilgrims that traversed the streets chanting the penitential psalms, or scourging themselves in an attempt to avert the wrath of heaven. Witches gathered in the low marshes of the Maremma and came at night into the city, trailing grey fever-laden vapour after them. The bell ropes began to rot in the churches, and the bells clattered from the steeples. The gold rusted on the altars, and mice gnawed the garments on the holy images of the saints. The people lived with reckless laughter and died with hopeless curses. And such, under Pope Michael II, was Rome, swiftly and in a moment. Theirry, like all others, went heavily armed. His hand was constantly on his sword hilt as he made his way through the city that was forsaken by God. Theirry walked beyond the Appian Gate and stopped at a low convent building, above the portals of which hung a lamp, its gentle radiance like a star in the heavy noisome twilight. The gate that led into a courtyard stood half open. Theirry softly pushed it wider and entered. There were no lights in the convent windows, but it was not yet too dark for Theirry to distinguish the slim figure of a lady seated on a wooden bench, her hands passive in her lap. He latched the gate and softly crossed the lawn. "You said that I might come." Jacobea turned her head, unsmiling, unsurprised. Sir, this place is open to all." He seated himself beside her. "What do you do here?" he asked. "So little. There are 2 sisters here, and I help them. One can do nothing against the plague, but for the little forsaken children something, and something for the miserable sick." "The wretched of Rome are not in your keeping," he said eagerly. "It will mean your life. Why did you not go with the Empress?" She shook her head. "I was not needed. I suppose what they said of her was true. I cannot remember it clearly, but I think that when Melchoir died I knew it was her doing." "We must not dwell on the past," said Theirry. "Have you heard that I lead the Pope's army against Balthasar?" "Nay." Her eyes were on the white rose. "Jacobea, I shall be the Emperor." In the now complete dark they could scarcely see each other; there were no stars, and distant thunder rolled at intervals. Theirry timidly put out his hand and touched the fold of her dress where it lay along the seat. " I wish you would not stay here — it is so lonely — I think she would wish me to do this." "She?" he questioned. "Sybilla." "She is dead." " Yea, she died on a cold morning; it was so cold you could see your breath before you as you rode along, and the road was hard as glass. There was a yellow dawn that day, and the pine trees seemed frozen; they stood so motionless. You would not think it was 10 years ago. I wonder how long it seems to her." A silence fell upon them for a while. Then Theirry broke out desperately. " Jacobea, my heart is torn within me. To day I said there was no God, but when I sit by you "" Yea, there is a God," she answered quietly. " Be very sure of that." " Oh, Jacobea," he cried at last, " I am beyond all measure mean and vile — I know not what to do. I can be Emperor, yet as I sit here that seems to me as nothing." Jacobea rose slowly from the bench. " Why do you come to me?" " Because ye seem to me nearer heaven than anything I know." He followed her dim seen figure across the grass. She lifted the latch of the convent door and went before him into the building. For a while she left him in the passage, then returned with a pale lamp in her hand and conducted him into a small bare chamber, which seemed mean in contrast with the glowing splendour of his appearance. " The sisters are abroad," said Jacobea, " and I stay here in case any ring the bell for succour." She set her lamp on the wooden table and slowly turned her eyes on Theirry. " Sir, I am very selfish." She spoke with difficulty, as if she painfully forced expression. " I have thought of myself for so many years, and somehow "— she lightly touched her breast —" I cannot feel — for myself or for others — nothing seems real save Sybilla — nothing matters save her. Sometimes I cry for little things I find dying alone, for poor unnoticed miseries of animals and children, but for the rest — you must not blame me if I do not sympathise — that has gone from me, nor can I help you — God is far away beyond the stars — I do not think He can stoop to such as you and me — and I do not feel as if I should wake until I die." Theirry covered his eyes and moaned. Jacobea was not looking at him, but at the one bright thing in the room, a samite cushion worked with a scarlet lily that rested on a chair by the window. She took her gaze from the red flower and turned her tired grey eyes on him. The blood surged into his face; he clenched his hands and spoke passionately. " I will renounce the world — I will become a monk." "What was that?" asked Jacobea. One was singing without. Theirry's strained eyes glistened. " If love were all, his perfect servant I would be, kissing where his foot might fall, doing him homage on a lowly knee. If love were all." Theirry turned and went out into the dark, hot night; he could see neither roses nor fountain, nor even the line of the convent wall against the sky. But the light above the gate revealed to him the dancer in orange, who leant against the stone arch of the entrance and sang to a strange long instrument that hung round her neck by a gleaming chain. At her feet the ape crouched, nodding himself to sleep. " What do you here?" he demanded fiercely. " The Pope's spy, you." " May I not come to worship here as well as another?" she answered. He caught her by the arms and held her against the stone gateway. " Now tell me the meaning of your disguise," he breathed, " and of your league with Michael II." She said a strange little word under her breath; the ape jumped up and tore away the man's hands, while the girl bent to a run and sped through the gate. Thierry gave a cry of pain and rage and glanced towards the convent. The door was closed, lady and lamp had disappeared in the darkness. " Shut out," whispered Theirry. " Shut out." He turned into the street and saw by the scattered lanterns along the Appian Way the figure of the dancer slipping fast towards the city gates. But he gained on her, and at the sound of his clattering step she looked round. " Ah," she said, " I thought you had stayed with the sweet faced saint yonder." " She wants none of me," he panted. " But I mean to see your face to night." " I am not beautiful," answered the dancer, " and you have seen my face." " Seen your face !"" Certes, in the Basilica on the fete." The ever gathering tempest was drawing near, with fitful flashes of lightning playing over his jewel like mail and her orange gown as they made their way through the ruins. " Do you wander here alone at night?" asked Theirry. " It is a vile place, a man might be afraid." " I have the ape," she said. " Where are we going?" asked Theirry. The wayside lanterns had ceased, he could see her only by the lightning gleams. " I know not. Why do you follow me?" " I am mad, I think. The earth rocks beneath me and heaven bends overhead. You lure me and I follow in sheer confusion. Ursula of Rooselaare, why have you lured me? What power is it that you have over me? Wherefore are you disguised?" " I am Balthasar's wife." " Ay," he responded eagerly, " and I do hear ye loved another man." " What is that to you?" she asked. " This, though I have not seen your face, perchance I could love you, Ursula." There was no answer. He felt her arm quiver under his hand, and heard the hems of her tunic tinkle against her buskins as if she trembled. At last she spoke, in a half swooning voice. " I have taken off my mask. Bend your head and kiss me." Invisible and potent powers drew him towards her unseen face. His lips touched and kissed its softness. The thunder sounded with such a terrific force and clash that Theirry sprang back. A cry of agony went up from the darkness. He ran blindly forward. Her presence had gone from his side, nor could he see or feel her as he moved. He ran sobbing down the Appian Way, and his pace was very swift for all the mail he carried. End of Section 30. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 31 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 9, Pope and Empress. The Pope walked in the garden of the Vatican. Behind him Cardinal Orsini and Cardinal Colonna. Both talked of the horrible state of Rome, of the unending storm hanging over the capital, of the army that had gone forth 3 days ago to crush the excommunicated Emperor. Michael II was silent. He wore a white robe, his soft, heavy red hair showing a brilliant colour above it. His dark eyes were thoughtful, his pale mouth resolutely set. The cardinals fell further behind and conversed with the greater ease. Suddenly the Pope paused and stood waiting, for Paolo Orsini, with a sprig of pink flower at his chin, was coming across the lawn. Michael II tapped his gold shod foot on the marble path. " What is it, Orsini?" " Your Holiness, a lady, who will neither unveil nor give her name, has obtained entry to the Vatican and desires to see your Holiness." Michael II reflected a moment, his slim fingers pulling at the laurel leaves beside him. " We will see her," he said at length. " Bring her here, Orsini." The yellow clouds broke over a brief spell of sunshine that fell across the Vatican gardens. Though the horizon was dark with a freshly gathering storm, Michael II seated himself on a bench where the sun gleamed. " Sirs," he said to the 2 cardinals, " stand by me and listen to what this woman may say." And picking a crimson rose from a thorny bush that brushed the seat, he considered it curiously and only took his eyes from it when Paolo Orsini had returned and led the lady almost to his feet. Then he looked at her. She wore a dark rough dress showing marks of ill usage, and over her face a thick veil. This she loosened as she knelt, and revealed the exceedingly fair, sad face of Ysabeau the Empress. Michael II went swiftly pale. He fixed large eyes on her. " What do you here, defying us?" he demanded. She rose. " I am not here in defiance. I have come to give myself up to punishment for the crime you denounced, the crime for which my lord now suffers. It did not occur to your Holiness," she added, facing him fearlessly, " that I should do this. You thought that he would never give me up, and you were right. Crown, life, heaven he would forfeit for love of me, but I will not take the sacrifice." At last Michael spoke. " Ye slew Melchoir of Brabant, ye confess it?" Her bosom heaved. " I am here to confess it." " For love of Balthasar you did it?" " As for love of him, I stand here now to take the consequences." The Pope cast the crushed rose from him. " Has Balthasar sent you here?" She smiled proudly. " I come without his knowledge." Her voice trembled a little. " I left a writing telling him where I had gone and why." Her hand crept to her brow. " Enough of that." Michael II rose. " Why have you done this?" he cried angrily. Ysabeau answered swiftly. " That you may take the curse off him. For my sin you cast him forth. Well, if I leave him, if I accept my punishment, if he be free to find the woman who can claim him, your Holiness must absolve him of the excommunication." " Had you told him to his face of your crime, would he have given you over to our wrath?" " Nay," she flashed. " It would have been only noble in him to refuse. But since of myself I have come, I pray you, Lord Pope, to send me to death and take the curse off him." Michael II looked at his hand. The stem of the red rose had scratched his finger, and a tiny drop of blood showed on the white flesh. " You are a wicked woman by your own confession," he said, frowning. " Why should I show you any pity?" " I do not ask pity, but justice for the Emperor. I am the cause of the quarrel, and now ye have me ye can have no bitterness against him." He gave her a quick sidelong look. " Do you repent, Ysabeau?" She shook the clinging hood free of her yellow hair. " No, the gain was worth the sin, nor am I afraid of you nor heaven. I am not of a faltering race, nor of a name easily ashamed. In my own eyes I am not abashed." Michael raised his head and their eyes met. " So you would die for him?" " When I was a child I was taught that they who live as kings and queens must not look for age. The flame soon burns away, leaving the ashes, and gorgeous years are like the flame. Why should we taste the dust that follows? I have lived my life." He answered: "This shall not save Balthasar, nor take our curse from off him. Theirry of Dendermonde has gone forth with many men and banners, and soon the Roman gates shall open to him and victory lead his charger through the streets. And his reward shall be the Latin world, his badge of triumph the imperial crown. He is our choice to share with us the dominion of the West. Therefore no more of Balthasar. Ye might speak until the heavens fell, and still our hearts be as brass." He turned swiftly and caught the arm of Cardinal Orsini. " Away, my lord, we have given this Greek time enough." She clutched in her desperation at the priest's white garments. " Show some pity. Balthasar dies beneath your wrath." " Take her away," said Michael. " Cast her from Rome." He glared at her over his shoulder. " Doubtless the Eastern she cat will find it worse so to die than as Hugh of Rooselaare perished. Come on, my lords." " This your Christian priest she cried hoarsely, starting after the white figure. Then, as she saw the guards approaching, she fell into an utter silence. As Michael II entered the Vatican, the sun was again obscured, and the thunder rolled. He passed up the silver stairs to his cabinet and closed the door on all. The storm grew and rioted angrily in the sky. In the height of it came a messenger riding straight to the Vatican. Blood and dust were smeared on his clothes, and he was weary with swift travel. They brought him to the ebony cabinet and face to face with the Pope. "From Thierry of Dendermonde, your Holiness." "What says he? Victory?" "Balthasar of Courtrai is defeated. His army lies dead, men and horses, in the Vale of Tivoli, and his conqueror marches home today." A shaft of lightning showed the ghastly face of Michael II, and a peal of thunder shook the messenger back against the wall. End of section 31. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 32 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 10. Evening before the Coronation. The orange marble pillars, glowing in the light of 100 lamps, gave the chamber a dazzling brightness. The windows were screened by scarlet silk curtains, and crystal bowls of purple flowers stood on the serpentine floor. On a low gilt couch against the wall sat Thierry, his gold armour half concealed by a violet and ermine mantle. Round his close dark hair was a wreath of red roses, and the long pearls in his ears glimmered with his movements. Opposite him, on a throne supported by basalt lions, was Michael II, robed in gold and silver tissues under a dalmatica of orange and crimson brocade. "It is done," he said in a low eager voice, "and tomorrow I crown you in St. Peter's Church. Thierry, it is done." "Truly our fortunes are marvellous," answered Thierry. "Today, when I heard the princes elect me, an unknown adventurer, when I heard the mob of Rome shout for me, I thought I had gone mad." "Are you afraid of me?" the other asked. "Why do you so seldom look at me?" Thierry slowly turned his beautiful face. "I am afraid of my own fortunes. I am not as bold as you," he said fearfully. "You never hesitated to sin." The Pope moved, and his garments sparkled against the gleaming marble wall. "I do not sin," he smiled. "I am sin. I do no evil, for I am evil. But you," his face became grave, almost sad, "you are very human. Better it had been for me never to have met you. Thierry, for your sake I have risked everything. For your sake, maybe, I must leave this strange fair life and go back whence I came. So much I care for you, so dearly have I kept the vows we made in Frankfort. Cannot you meet with courage the destiny I offer you? Was not your blood warmed by that charge at Tivoli, when knight and horse fell before your spears and your host humbled an emperor, when Rome rose to greet you and I came to meet you with a kingdom for a gift? Did not some fire creep into your veins that might serve to heat you now?" "A kingdom!" cried Thierry. "The kingdom of Antichrist! The victory was not mine. The cohorts of the devil galloped beside us and urged us to unholy triumph. Rome is a place of horror, full of witches, ghosts and strange beasts." "You said you would be Emperor," answered the Pope, "and I have granted you your wish. If you fail me or betray me now, it is over — for both of us." Thierry stopped in his pacing to and fro. "Why do you say to me so often, 'Do not fail me'? Ye dwell much on women. I had rather you thought on battles and kingdoms. Had I been were on my way to be my ruin and your own, would you were not such a sweet fair fool that I must love you, and so we make ourselves the mock of destiny by these complaints. Oh, if you have the desire to be king, show the courage to dare a kingly fate." " You must think me a coward," Theirry said, " and I have been very weak, but that, I think, is past. I have reached the summit of all the greatness I ever dreamed, and it confuses me. But when the imperial crown is mine you shall find me bold enough." " Then are we great indeed. We shall join hands across the fairest dominion men ever ruled. Swabia is ours, Bohemia and Lombardy. France courts our alliance. Cyprus, the Isle of Candy, and Malta town, in Rhodes they worship us, and Genoa town owns us master." He paused in his speech and stepped down from the throne. " Do you remember that day in Antwerp, Theirry, when we looked in the mirror?" he said, and his voice was tender and beautiful. " We hardly dared then to think of this." " We saw a gallows in that mirror," answered Theirry. " A gallows tree beside the triple crown." " It was for our enemies," cried Michael. " Our enemies whom we have triumphed over. Theirry, think of it, we were very young then, and poor; now I have kings at my footstool, and you will sleep to night in the gold palace of the Aventine." He laughed joyously. Theirry's face grew gentle at the old memories. " The house still stands, I wot," he mused, " though the dust be thick over the deserted rooms, and the vine chokes the windows. When I was in the East I have thought with great joy of Antwerp." The Pope laid his delicate fragrant hand on the glittering vambrace. " Theirry, do you not value me a little now?" " You have done more for me than man or God, and above both I do worship you," he answered. " I am not fearful any more, and to morrow ye shall see me a king indeed. Until to morrow then, farewell. I must attend a conclave of the Cardinals and show myself unto the multitude in St. Peter's Church. You to the palace on the Aventine, there to sleep soft and dream of gold." They clasped hands. A hot colour was in the Pope's face. " The Syrian guards wait below, and the Lombard archers who stood beside you at Tivoli; they will attend you to the Imperial Palace." " What shall I do there?" asked Theirry. " It is early yet, and I do not love to sit alone." " Then come to the service in the Basilica. Come with a bold bearing and a rich dress to overawe these mongrel crowds of Rome." To that Theirry made no answer. The Pope came quickly to his side. " Do not go to Jacobea to night," he said earnestly. " Remember, if you fail me now "" I shall not fail you or myself again. Farewell." Theirry descended the stairs and now and then looked up, always to see fixed on him the yearning, fierce gaze of the one who stood by the gilded rails and stared down at his glittering figure. Only when he had completely disappeared in the turn of the stairs did Michael II slowly return to the golden chamber and close the gorgeous doors. Theirry, splendidly attended, flashed through the riotous streets of Rome to the palace on the Aventine Hill. There he dismissed the knights. " I shall not go to the Basilica to night," he said. " Go thou there without me." He laid aside the golden armour, the purple cloak, and attired himself in a dark habit and a steel corselet. He meant to be Emperor to morrow, he meant to be faithful to the Pope, but it was in his heart to see Jacobea once more before he accepted the Devil's last gift and sign. Leaving the palace secretly when they all thought him in his chamber, he took his way toward the Appian Gate. He gently pushed the convent gate and entered. The hot dusk just revealed to him the dim shapes of the white roses and the dark figure of a lady standing beside them. "Jacobea," he whispered. She moved very slowly towards him. "Ah, you." "Jacobea, you must not remain in this place. Where are the nuns?" She shook her head. "They are dead of the plague days past, and I have buried them in the garden." He thought she smiled. He followed her into the house, the chamber where they had sat before. A tall pale candle burnt on the bare table, and by the light of it he saw her face. She crept with a slow sick movement to a bench that stood against the wall, and sank down on it. Her features showed pinched and wan, her eyes unnaturally blue in the pallor of her face. "You must return to Martzburg," cried Theirry distractedly, and thought of her as he had first seen her, bright and gay in a pale crimson dress. "Nay, I shall return to Martzburg no more," she answered. "He died to day." "He? Who died, Jacobea?" Very faintly she smiled. "Sebastian, in Palestine. God let me see him then, because I had never looked on him since that morning on which you saw us, sir. He has been a holy man fighting the infidel. They wounded him, I think, and he was sick with fever. He crept into the shade, for it is very hot there, sir, and died." Theirry stood dumb, and the mad hatred of the devil who brought about this misery anew possessed him. Jacobea spoke again. "Maybe they have met in paradise, and as for me, I hope God may think me fit to die. Of late it seemed to me that the fiends were again troubling me." She clasped her hands tightly on her knees and shivered. "Something evil is abroad. Who is the dancer? Last night I saw her crouching by my gate as I was making the grave of Sister Angela, and it seemed that she bewitched me as the young scholar did long ago." Theirry leant heavily against the table. "She is the Pope's spy and tool," he cried hoarsely. "Ursula of Rooselaare." Jacobea's dim eyes were bewildered. "Ah, Balthasar's wife," she faltered. "But the Pope's tool — how should he meddle with an evil thing?" Then he told her in an outburst of wild, unnameable feeling. "The Pope is Dirk Renswoude, the Pope is Antichrist, do you not understand? And I am to help him rule the kingdom of the devil." "Dirk Renswoude," she muttered, "and Ursula of Rooselaare — why? Was it not to save Hugh of Rooselaare that he rode that night?" Theirry lifted his head and looked at her. Her utterance was feeble and confused, her eyes glazing in a livid face. He clasped his hands tightly over hers. "What was Lord Hugh to him?" she asked. "Ursula's father?" "I do not understand," cried Theirry. "But it is very clear to me. I am dying. She loved you, loves you still — that such things should be." "Whom do you speak of, Jacobea?" he cried. She drooped towards him and he caught her in his arms. "The city is accursed," she gasped. "Give me Christian burial, if ever once you cared for me, and fly, fly." She strained and writhed in his frantic embrace. "And you never knew it was a woman," she whispered. "Pope and dancer." "God!" shrieked Theirry, and staggered to his feet, drawing her with him. She slipped from him to the bench. "Water! A crucifix! Oh, I have forgot my prayers." She stretched out her hands towards a wooden crucifix that hung on the wall, caught hold of it, pressed her lips to the feet. "Sybilla," she said, and died with that name struggling in her throat. Theirry stepped back from her with a strangled shriek that seemed to tear the breath from his body, and staggered against the table. The lightning leapt in through the dark window and appeared to plunge like a sword into the breast of the dead woman. Dead, even as she uttered that horror, dead so suddenly. The plague had slain her. He did not wish to die, So he must leave this place. Was he not to be Emperor tomorrow? He fell to laughing. He crawled across the room and stared at Jacobea. She was not beautiful. He noticed that her hands were torn and stained with earth from making the graves of the nuns. She had asked for Christian burial. He could not stay to give it to her. He fiercely hated her for what she had told him, yet he took up the ends of her yellow hair and kissed them. Again the thunder and lightning and wild howlings reached him from without, as ghosts and night hags wandered past to hold court within the accursed city. The candle shot up a long tongue of flame and went out. Theirry staggered across the darkness. A flash of lightning showed him the door. As the thunder crashed above the city, he fled from the convent and from Rome. End of section 32. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 33 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 11, The Angels. In a ruined villa, shattered by the barbarians and crumbled by time, sat Isabeau the Empress looking over the sunless Maremma. A few olive trees were all that shaded the bare expanse of marshy land, where great pools veiled with unhealthy vapours gleamed faintly under the heavy clouds. Here and there rose the straight roof of a forsaken convent, or the stately pillars of a deserted palace. There was no human being in sight. She had dwelt here for 3 days. At every sunrise a peasant girl, daring the excommunication, had brought her food, then fled with a frightened face. Isabeau saw nothing before her save death, but she did not mean to die by the ignoble way of starvation. She had not heard of the defeat of Balthasar at Tivoli, nor of the election of Theirry to the crown. Day and night she thought on her husband, and pondered how she still might possibly serve him. She did not hope to see him again. It never occurred to her to return to him. When she had fled his camp, she had left a confession behind her. No Greek would have heeded it, but these Saxons, still to her foreigners, were different, and Balthasar had loved Melchoir of Brabant. She moved to the inner portion of the villa, and here she seated herself on the capital of a broken column, and a languid weariness subdued her proud spirit. Her head sank back against the stained wall, and she slept. When she woke, the whole landscape was glowing with the soft red of sunset. There were faint voices coming from the outer room, and the sound of a man's tread. For a while she waited, then crept cautiously towards the shattered doorway that led into the other chamber. She gained it and gazed through. Sitting where she had just now sat, under the vine-twisted columns, was a huge knight in defaced armour. His back was towards her, by his side his helmet stood, and the great glittering dragon that formed the crest shone in the setting sun. He was bending over a child that lay asleep on a crimson cloak. " Balthasar," said Isabeau. He gave a little cry and looked over his shoulder. He rose softly, his face flushed. " I am a ruined man. They have elected another Emperor. Now I think it does not matter." Her eyes travelled in a dazed way to the child. " Is he sick?" " Nay, only weary. We have been wandering since Tivoli." When he spoke he looked at her as if the world held nothing else worth gazing on. " I must go," said Isabeau. " Must go?" " I am cast out. I may not share your misfortunes." Balthasar laughed. " I have been searching for you madly, Isabeau." " But you found the writing?" she cried. " Yea." " You know I slew him?" " I know you went to give your life for me." " Oh, Balthasar, does it make no difference?" " It cannot," he said half sadly. " You are my wife, part of me. I have given you my heart to keep, and nothing can alter it." "You do not mock me?" she questioned, shuddering. "It must be that you mock me. I will go away." He stepped before her. "You shall never leave me again, Ysabeau." He put his arm round her bowed shoulders, her marvellous hair lay across his dinted mail. "This is sweeter than our marriage day, Balthasar, for now you know the worst of me." He set her gently on the broken shaft by the door and kissed her hand, and he told her how they had been defeated at Tivoli, how the remnant of his force had forsaken him, and how Theirry of Dendermonde had been elected Emperor by the wishes of the Pope. Her eyes grew fierce at that. "I have ruined you," she said, "made you a beggar." "Could I have held a throne without you, Ysabeau?" Her fingers trembled in his. "Would I had been a better woman for your sake, Balthasar." His swift bright flush dyed his fair face. "All I grieve for, Ysabeau, is God." "God?" she asked, wondering. "If He should not forgive me?" His blue eyes were troubled. "And we are cursed and cast out — what think you?" "Through me. You grieve, and this is through me." "Nay, our destiny is one — always. Only I think of afterwards — yet if you are — damned, as the priest says — why, I will be so too. Do not fear, Balthasar. If God will not receive me, the little images at Constantinople will forgive me if I pray to them again, as I did when I was a child." They fell on silence again, while the red colour of the setting sun deepened and cast a glow over their weary faces and the sleeping figure of Wencelaus. The vine leaves fluttered from the ancient marble, and the wild fowl screamed across the marshes. "Who is this Pope that he should hate us so?" mused Ysabeau. "And who Theirry of Dendermonde that he should be Emperor of the West? I do not understand it, nor do I now, Ysabeau," Balthasar looked at her, "greatly care." She raised his hand, kissed it, and no more was said, while the mists gathered and thickened over the Maremma and the rich hues faded from the sky. "Who is that?" cried Ysabeau, and pointed across the marshland. A figure, dark against the mists, was running aimlessly, wildly to and fro, winding his way in and out the pools, now and then flinging his arms up in a frantic gesture toward the evening sky. "A madman," said Balthasar. "See, he runs with no object, round and round, yet always as if pursued." Suddenly, as if exhausted, the man stopped and stood still with hanging head and arms. The sun, burning to the horizon, made a vivid background to his tall dark figure, till the heavy noisome vapours rose to the level of the sunset, and the solitary motionless stranger was blotted from the view of the two watching in the ruined villa. "We must get away," said Balthasar resolutely. "This is a vile spot." "The man," whispered Ysabeau. Out of the dreary vapours, the forlorn and foul mists of the marches, he appeared, stumbling over the stones in his way. He caught hold of the slender pillar by the entrance and stared at the three with distraught eyes. His clothes were dark, wet and soiled, his hair hung lank round a face hollow and pale, but of obvious beauty. "Theirry of Dendermonde!" exclaimed Balthasar. Ysabeau gave a cry that woke the child and sent him frightened into her arms. "The Emperor," said the newcomer in a feeble voice. Balthasar answered fiercely. "Am I still Emperor to you? You who to day were to receive my crown in St. Peter's Church?" Theirry shivered and crouched like one very cold. "Of my own will I fled from Rome, that city of the devil." Balthasar stared at him. "You are the Emperor," said Theirry faintly, "and I pretend no longer to these wrongful honours, nor serve I any longer Antichrist." "He is mad!" cried Balthasar. "Nay," Ysabeau spoke eagerly. "Listen to him." Theirry moaned. "I have nothing to say. Give me a place to rest in. Through you we have no place ourselves to rest in," answered Balthasar grimly. "No shelter save these broken walls you see. But since you have returned to your allegiance, we command that you tell us of this Antichrist." Theirry straightened himself. "He who reigns in Rome is Antichrist, Michael, who was Dirk Renswoude." "He perished," said the Emperor, very pale. "And the Pope was Blaise of Dendermonde." "That was the devil's work, black magic," cried Theirry wildly. "The youth Blaise died 10 years ago, and Dirk Renswoude took his place." "It is true," cried the Empress. "By what he said to me I know it true. Now do I see it very clearly." Then Theirry began to speak. He told them in a thick, expressionless voice all he knew of Dirk Renswoude. He did not mention Ursula of Rooselaare. As his tale went on, the storm gathered till all light had vanished from the sky. The lightning rent a starless gloom. Theirry's voice suddenly strengthened. "Now turn against Rome, for all men will join you. A force of Lombards marches up from Trastevere, and the Saxons gather without the walls of the accursed city." A blue flash showed them his face; they heard him fall. After a while Balthasar made his way to him through the dark. " He has fainted," he said fearfully. " Is he belike mad?" " He speaks the hideous truth," whispered Ysabeau. Suddenly, at its very height, the storm ceased. The air became cool and fragrant, and a bright moon floated from the clouds, the first moon and stars that had shone since Michael II's reign in the Vatican. Balthasar looked at his wife. Neither dared to speak, but Wencelaus gave a panting sigh of relief at the lifting of the darkness. " My lord," he said, striving out of his mother's arms, " a goodly company comes across the marsh." A great awe and fear held them silent, and the wonderful silver shine of the moon lay over them like a spell. They saw, slowly approaching them, 2 knights and 2 ladies, who seemed to advance without motion across the marshland. The knights wore armour that shone like glass and long mantles of white samite. The dames were clad in silver tissue, and around their brows were close pressed wreaths of roses mingled red and white. They paused. Balthasar drew back before the great light they brought with them, and Ysabeau hid her face, for some of them she knew. On earth their names had been Melchoir, Sebastian, Jacobea and Sybilla. " Balthasar," said the foremost knight, " we are come from the courts of Paradise to bid you march against Rome. In that city reigns evil, permitted to punish a sinful people, but now her time is come. Go you to Viterbo, there you will find the Cardinal of Narbonne, whom God has ordained Pope, and with him an army. At the head of it storm Rome, and all the people shall join you in destroying Antichrist." Balthasar fell on his knees. " And the curse?" he cried. " 'Tis not the curse of God upon you, therefore be comforted, Balthasar of Courtrai, and at the dawn haste to Viterbo." With that they moved away, and were absorbed into the silver light that transfigured the Maremma. Balthasar sprang to his feet, shouting: " I am not excommunicate! I shall be Emperor again! The curse is lifted!" Balthasar caught Theirry by the shoulder. " Did you see the vision? The angels?" Theirry came shuddering from his swoon. " I saw nothing. Ursula, Ursula!" End of Section 33, recording by Molly Craig. Section 34 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 12, In the Vatican. In the ebony cabinet in the Vatican sat Michael II. An expression of utter anguish marked his face. Paolo Orsini entered. The Pope glanced at him without moving. "No news?" he asked. " None of the Lord Theirry, your Holiness." Michael II moistened his lips. " They have searched everywhere?" " Throughout Rome, your Holiness. But "" He was armed, they said, when he left the palace. Have you sent to the convent I told you of, Saint Angela, beyond the Appian Gate?" " Yea, your Holiness," answered Orsini, " and they found nought but a dead woman." The Pope averted his eyes. " What did they with her?" Orsini lifted his brows. " Cast her into the plague pit, Holiness. That quarter is a charnel house." The Pope drew a deep breath. " Well, he is gone. I do not think him dead." He flung back his head. " But the game is over, is it not, Orsini? We fling down our pieces and say good night." His nostrils dilated, his eyes flashed. He brought his open hand softly on to the table. " What does your Holiness mean?" asked Orsini. " We mean that this puppet Emperor of ours has forsaken us, and that our position becomes perilous," answered the Pope. " Cardinal Narbonne, hurling defiance at us from Viterbo, grows stronger, and the mob — do not seek to deceive me, Orsini — the mob clamours against us?" " It is true, my lord." The Pope gave a terrible smile, and his beautiful eyes widened. " And the soldiers mutiny. The Saxons at Trastevere have joined Balthasar, and the Veronese have left me. We have not enough men to hold Rome an hour. Well, Orsini, you shall take a summons to the Cardinals, and we will hold a conclave, there to decide how we may meet our fortune." The secretary departed in silence. Mutterings, murmurings, howlings rose from the accursed city to the Pontiff's chamber. Lightning darted from the black heavens and thunder rolled round the hills of Rome. Michael II walked to and fro in his gorgeous cabinet. In the 3 days since Theirry had fled the city, his power had crumbled like a handful of sand. Rome had turned against him, and every hour men fell away from his cause. The devils, too, had forsaken him. He could not raise the spirits, the magic fires would not burn, all was blank darkness and silence. The day wore on and the storm grew in violence. Paolo Orsini came again to him, his face pale. " Half the Cardinals are fled to Viterbo, and those remaining refuse to acknowledge your Holiness." The Pope smiled. " I had expected it." " News comes from a Greek runner that Theirry of Dendermonde is with Balthasar's host." " Also I expected that," said Michael II. wildly. " And they proclaim you," continued Orsini in an agitated manner, " an impostor, one given to evil practices, and by these means incite the people against you. Cardinal Orvieto has led 1,000 men across the marshes to the Emperor's army." " And Theirry of Dendermonde has denounced me," said the Pope. As he spoke one beat for admission on the gilt door. The secretary opened, and there entered an Eastern chamberlain. " Holiness," he cried fearfully, " the people have set fire to your palace on the Palatine Hill, and Cardinal Colonna, with his brother Octavian, have seized Castel San Angelo for the Emperor and hold it in defiance of your Grace." " The captain of my guard and those faithful to me," answered the Pope, " will know how to do what may be done. Apprise me of the approach of Balthasar's host, and now go." They left him. He stood for a while listening to those ominous sounds that filled the murky air. Then he pressed a spring in one of the mother of pearl panels and stepped into the secret chamber that was revealed. Cautiously he closed the panel by which he had entered, and looked furtively about him. The small windowless space was lit only by one blood red lamp. Locked cupboards lined the walls, and a huge globe of faint gold, painted with curious and mystic symbols, hung from the ceiling. The Pope's stiff garments made a soft rustling sound as he moved, his quick desperate breathing disturbed the heavy confined air. In his pallid face his eyes rolled and gleamed. " Sathanas, Sathanas," he muttered. " Is this the end?" A throbbing shook the red lit gloom; his last words were echoed mournfully.
The end. The Pope glared in front of him. Must I die, Sathanas? Must I swiftly die? A little confused laughter came before the echo. Swiftly die. He paced up and down the narrow space. I staked my fortunes on that man's faith, and he has forsaken me, and I have lost, 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 lost. The Pope laughed frantically. At least she died, Sathanas. Her yellow hair rots in the plague pit now. I had some skill left, but what was all my skill if I could not keep him faithful to me? He clasped his jewelled hands over his eyes. Utter silence followed his words now. The globe of pallid gold trembled in the darkness of the domed ceiling, and the mystic characters on it began to writhe and move. "Ye warned me," breathed the Pope, "that this man would be my bane. You promised on his truth to you and me to have the world between us. He was false, and you have utterly forsaken me?" The echo answered, "Utterly forsaken?" The lamp went out. The pale luminous globe expanded to a monstrous size, the circle of dark little fiends round it danced and whirled madly. Then it burst and fell in 1,000 fragments at the Pope's feet. Out of the darkness came a wail as of some thing hurt or dying, then long sighing shook the close air. The Pope fell along the wall, touched the spring and stepped into the ebony cabinet. He looked quite old and small and bowed. Night had fallen. He sank into a chair and folded his hands in his lap. His head fell forward on his breast, his lips quivered, and 2 tears rolled down his cheeks. The Angelus bells rang out over the city. There were not many to ring now. As they quivered away a clock struck quite near. The Pope did not move. Once again Paolo Orsini entered, and Michael II averted his face. "Holiness, Balthasar marches on Rome," said the secretary. The mob rushed forth to join him, and if the gates were brass, and 5 times brass, the Vatican could not withstand them. Now the Pope turned his white face. "What may I do?" "The captain of the guard suggests that ye come to terms with the Emperor, and by submission save your life." "That I will not." "Then it were well if your Holiness would flee. There is a secret way out of the Vatican." "And that I will not." Orsini too was very pale. "Then you are doomed to fall into the hands of Balthasar, and he and his faction say horrible things." The Pope rose. "You think they would lay hands on me?" "I do fear it." "It would be a shameful death, Orsini?" "Surely not that. I cannot think the Emperor would do more than imprison your Holiness." The Pope went to the window. "How they howl," he said through his teeth, "and Balthasar comes nearer, nearer." He checked himself abruptly. "I will dine here to night, Orsini. See that everything is done as usual." The secretary bowed himself out of the gilt door. Michael II went to the table on the dais and took from it a scroll of parchment. Standing in the centre of the room he unrolled it. Some verses were written in scarlet ink on the smooth surface. In a low voice he read aloud the 2 last. "If love were all, I had lived glad and meek, nor heard ambition call and valour speak. If love were all." He smiled bitterly. "But love is weak, and often leaves his throne, among his scattered roses pale, to weep and moan. And I, apostate to his whispered creed, shall miss his wings above my pall, nor find his face in this my bitter need, when love is all." He tore the parchments into fragments and scattered them on the floor. Again the gilt doors were opened. This time a chamberlain entered. A herald had brought a fierce and grim message from Balthasar. It spoke of the Pope as Antichrist, and called on him to submit if he would keep his life. The Pope read it with haughty eyes, When he had finished, he rent it across and cast the pieces down among the others. "And ye shall hang the herald," he said. "We have so much authority." The chamberlain handed him a second packet, sealed, from Thierry of Dendermonde. The Pope took the packet. "Let the herald live," he said, "but cast him into the dungeons."
The chamberlain withdrew.
For a while Michael II stood staring at the packet while the thunder crashed over Rome. Then he slowly broke the seal. He unfolded the long strip of vellum and went nearer the candles to read it. Thus it ran: "The Emperor's camp, marching on Rome. Thierry of Dendermonde to Michael, Pope of Rome. Thus: I am approaching madness. I cannot sleep or rest. After days of torment I write to you whom I have twice betrayed. She died on my breast, but I do not care. Balthasar says he saw her walking on the Maremma, but I saw nothing. Before she died she said something. I think of you and of nothing else, though I have betrayed you. I have never uttered what she said. No one guesses. The uncertainty, the horror gnaw away at my heart, so I write this to you. This is my message. If you are a devil, be satisfied, for your devil's work is done. If you are a man, you have befriended, wronged me, and I have avenged myself. If you are that other thing you may be, then I know you love me, and that I kissed you once. If this last be true, as I do think it true, have some pity on my long ignorance, and believe I have it in me to love even as you have loved. Oh, Ursula, I know a city in India where we might live, and you forget you ever ruled in Rome. Yonder are other gods who are so old they have forgot to punish, and they would smile on you and me there, Ursula. Balthasar marches on the city, and you must be ruined and discovered, brought to an end so horrible. You have showed me a secret way out of the Vatican. Use it now, this night. I am in advance of the host. I shall be without the Appian Gate tonight, and I have means whereby we may fly to the coast and there take ship to India. Until we meet, farewell. And in the name of all the passions you have roused in me, come." As the Pope read, all the colour slowly left his face. When he had finished, he mechanically rolled up the parchment, then unrolled it again. Thunder shook the Vatican, and the mob howled without. Again he read the letter. Then he thrust it into one of the candles and watched it blacken, curl, and burst into flame. He flung it on the marble floor and set his gold heel on it, grinding it into ashes. At the usual hour they served his sumptuous supper. When it was finished and removed, Paolo Orsini came again. "Will not your Holiness fly before it is too late?" All traces of anguish and woe had vanished from his master's features. He looked proud and beautiful. "I shall stay here, but let them who will seek safety." He dismissed Orsini and the attendants. It was now late in the evening and the thunder unceasing. The Pope locked the door of the cabinet, then went to the gilt table and wrote a letter rapidly. This he folded, sealed with purple wax, and stamped with his great thumb ring. He sat silent a little while after this, and stared with great luminous eyes before him, then roused himself and unlocked a drawer in the table. From this he took some documents, tied together with orange silk, and a ring with a red stone in it. One by one he burnt the parchments in the candle, and when they were reduced to a little pile of ashes, he cast the ring into the midst of it and turned away. He crossed to the window, drew the curtains, and looked out over Rome. In the black heavens above the black hills hung a huge meteor, a blazing globe of fire with a trail of flame. He took up one of the candles and went to the gold door that led to his bedchamber. Before he opened it, he paused a moment. The candle flame lit his vivid eyes, his haughty face, his glittering vestments. He turned the handle and entered the dark, spacious room. Through the high, undraped window could clearly be seen the star that seemed to burn away the very sky. The Pope set the candle on a shelf where it showed dim glimpses of white and gold tapestries, walls of alabaster, a bed of purple and gilt, mysterious, gorgeous luxury. He returned to the cabinet and took from the bosom of his gown a little bottle of yellow jade. For the stopper a ruby served. The thunder crashed deafeningly. The lightning seemed to split the room in twain. The Pope stood still, listening. Then he blew out the candles and returned to his bedchamber. Softly he passed into the scented, splendid chamber and closed the door behind him. End of section 34. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 35 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Chapter 13, The Secret. The mob had stormed the Vatican. Octavian Colonna, with a handful of fighting men, ascended the undefended marble staircase. The papal guards lay slain in the courtyard, and in the entrance hall, chamberlains, secretary, pages and priests fled or surrendered. With the Lord Colonna was Thierry of Dendermonde, who had entered Rome that morning by the Appian Gate and headed a faction of the lawless crowd in their wild attack on the Vatican. To himself he kept saying, "I shall know she did not come. I shall know she did not come." It was early morning. The terrific storm of last night still lingered over Rome. Flashes of blue light divided the murky clouds, and the thunder hung about the Aventine. The Colonna grew afraid. He waited below in the gorgeous audience chamber, and sent up to the Pope's apartments, demanding his submission and promising him safety. The overawed crowd retired into the courtyard and the piazza while Paolo Orsini ascended the silver stairs. He returned with this message: His Holiness's apartments were locked, nor could they make him hear. It was a common thought among the knights that Michael II had escaped. A monk offered to show them the secret passage where His Holiness might be even now. Many went. But Thierry followed the attendants to the gilt door of the ebony cabinet. They broke the lock and entered fearfully. On the floor, torn fragments of parchments, a pile of ashes with a ruby ring lying in the midst. Nothing else. His Holiness is in his chamber. We dare not enter. They had always been afraid of him. Even now his name held terror. The Colonna waits our news, cried Thierry wildly.
I dare enter.
They tiptoed to the other gilt door. It took them some time to remove the lock. When at last the door gave and swung open, they shrunk away, but Thierry passed into the chamber. The sombre light of dawn filled it. Heavy shadows obscured the rich splendours of golden colours, of gleaming white walls. The men crept after him. It seemed to Thierry as if the world had stopped about them. On the magnificent purple bed lay the Pope. On his brow the tiara glittered, and on his breast the chasuble. The crozier lay by his side on the samite coverlet, and his feet glittered in their golden shoes. By the crozier was a letter and a jade bottle. The attendants shrieked and fled. Thierry crept to the bedside and took up the parchment. His name was over the top. He broke the seal. He read the fair writing. If I be a devil, I go whence I came. If a man, I lived as one and died as one. If a woman, I have known love, conquered it, and by it have been vanquished. Whatsoever I am, I perish on the heights, but I do not descend from them. I have known things in their fullness and will not stay to taste the dregs. So, to you greeting, and not for long farewell." The letter fell from Theirry's hand, fluttered and sank to the floor. He raised his eyes and saw through the window the meteor blazing over Rome. Dead. He looked now at the proud smooth face on the pillow, the gems of the papal crown gleaming above the red locks, the jewelled chasuble sparkling in the strengthening dawn, until he was nearly fooled into thinking the bosom heaved beneath. He was alone. At least he could know. The air was like incense, sweet and stifling. His blood seemed to beat in his brain with a little foolish sound of melody. A shaft of grey light fell over the splendours of the bed, the roses and dragons, hawks and hounds, sewn on the curtains and coverlets. From the Pope's garments rose a subtle and beautiful perfume. "Ursula," said Theirry. He bent over the bed until the pearls in his ears touched his cheeks. Without, the thunder muttered. To know? He lifted the dead Pope's arm. There seemed to be neither weight nor substance under the stiff silk. He dropped the sleeve. His cold fingers unclasped the heavy chasuble. Underneath lay perfumed samite, white and soft. An awful sensation crept through his veins. He thought that under these gorgeous vestments was nothing, nothing, ashes. He did not dare to uncover the bosom that lay, that must lie, under the gleaming samite. But he must know. He lifted up the fair crowned head to peer madly into the proud features. It came away in his hands, like crumbling wood that may preserve, till touched, the semblance of the carving. So the Pope's head parted from the trunk. Theirry smiled with horror and stared at what he held. Then it disappeared, fell into ashes before his eyes, and the tiara rolled onto the floor. Gone, like an image of smoke. He sank across the headless thing on the bed. "Must I follow you to know? Follow you to hell?" he whispered. Now he could open the rich garments. They were empty of all save dust. The strange, strong perfume was stinging and numbing his brain, his heart. He thought he heard the fiends coming for his soul at last. He hid his face in the purple silk robes and felt his blood grow cold.
The room darkened about him. He knew he was being drawn downwards into eternity. He sighed and slipped from the bed onto the floor. As his last breath hovered on his lips, the meteor vanished. The thunderclouds rolled away from a fair blue sky, and a glorious sunrise laughed over the city. The reign of the Antichrist was ended. Through the Pope's chamber the notes of silver trumpets quivered, Balthasar's trumpets, as his hosts marched triumphantly into Rome.
End of section 35. Recording by Molly Craig. End of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen.